She walks it loud like a thunderstorm, debunking myths with style and form. True crime, conspiracies her game. Melissa Jade, remember her name. She's loud, feisty, spilling tea, diving deep into mystery, breaking down your wildest claims. Melissa Jade, she's got no shame. Microphone fierce like a roaring lion, unveiling secrets people been hiding. True crime queen of the digital scene, Melissa's got you hooked on her screen. She's loud, feisty, spilling tea, diving deep into mystery, breaking down your wildest claims. Melissa J, she's got no shame. Murders to cover-ups, nothing misses. Melissa's here to share her guesses. She's got theories big and bold, no stone unturned, no case cold. She's loud, feisty, spilling tea, diving deep into mystery, breaking down your wildest claims. Melissa J, she's got no shame. Melissa J, she's got no shame. Melissa J, she's got no shame. From murders to cover-ups, nothing misses. Melissa's here to share her guesses. She's got theories big and bold, no stone unturned, no case cold. She's loud, feisty, spilling tea, diving deep into mystery, breaking down your wildest claims. Melissa J, she's got no shame. 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 She's loud, feisty, spilling tea, diving deep into mystery, breaking down your wildest claims. Melissa J, she's got no shame.
Hello, hi Shay.
Hey, Melissa. Hey, everybody.
This site, they have their own little Kohberger area,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all, dude. This is so weird. Sorry, it's the first time I've gone on, and the site's like updated, and Kohberger has his own. Yo, that's how you know there is so much with him, because he has his own little area on the damn site.
I know it's kind of hard to get organized a little bit with it too. 'Cause I think like we were Harlot and I were realizing if you're not like on a laptop or something that it's hard from your phone or like
Is
a
it?
tablet, yeah, to like it doesn't show dates or even if you do like request desktop site, it's just not fully functioning the way we were used to.
It looks like, to be fair, I haven't navigated it. I just opened it up. But I'm like, oh snap, what is this? And it looks easier, but I might be mistaken. So I'll give it a chance. Hi everybody. Yo, there is so much. There is so much. I am so excited to go over this. Like, it just feels so, I don't know, over 2 years, and to be getting, so I'm getting anxiety, because it's like we had to really work towards a little bit of comments Anne would throw out in her motions, or how she would word things, and we would have to make a lot of educated guesses based on it. But
Mhm.
now all of a sudden, within days, it's like, oh my goodness, like, what is happening? We're getting so, well, what feels like so much, because they were so tight-lipped.
Yeah, thanks, Judge Hippler. He told him to quit sealing everything.
Hey, it was gonna have to come out, but it's honestly, and I've been trying not to watch other people's coverage on it, because I don't want to become tainted, but it's everywhere, and I'm seeing it all over my feed, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, it's making a stir, it's causing a stir. So I'm excited to be able to go over it ourselves and read it line by line, and kind of see what we pull from it without hearing anybody else's thoughts on it.
Yeah, same. I mean, there's got to be 30, 40 documents in here. So I don't know how I don't think anybody's gotten through all of it, you know?
I can't imagine that they have. But all right, let's just jump right into it. So this is our missing child for tonight's live stream. This is Josias Player. He has been missing since February 20th, 2025 from Grand Rapids, Michigan. He is 11 years old. It says both photos shown are of Josias. He was last seen on the 20th of February. Here's an additional photo, which it's so crazy sometimes the photos, how drastically different they can look. You know, he looks a lot younger in this second photo.
Oh, yeah, he does.
Yeah. So if you or anyone you know has information on Josiah's whereabouts, please contact the Grand Rapids Police Department at 1-616-456-3400.
It's
Hi.
precious.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Are you guys ready? Like, I'm ready for this. So since we were last live a few days ago with Idaho, so much we told you guys about all those lemonades that we saw that we knew were going to somewhat be like they're still redacted, like a lot of them are still like redacted, and but we've gotten a decent amount that we're able to see. And oh yeah, Carol and Cooper, hell yeah, I'm happy. Thank you for being here. Hi Marcus, hi everybody. Sorry, I'm just so excited. And
Hey,
so
everybody.
since we've done this live, our last live, oh my god, guys, there's a lot. So if you look now, they've even changed the website, and we have a damn timeline. We have going back, look at this shit, 2022. Oh my goodness. And it even goes in chronological order from top to bottom now.
Yeah, I see. I can't see those dates, so that's awesome.
It's so
And the little new thing that'll show you, so those new ones dropped today because the screenshots I sent you this morning, those were the ones that I guess dropped yesterday,
I
like
am
overnight.
I don't even know where to start, Shay.
I
You
was
know
like, I
what?
don't know where you want to go.
Let me grab my notebook because I feel like I'm gonna have to mark down which ones we open and which ones we, just to keep track of it, because there's gonna be so much. Oh yeah, hi guys. Yes, thank you all so much for being here. Hit the thumbs up if you already haven't. Honestly, I kind of just want to. That's Xana. That's exactly where my mind was at. I kind of want to jump right into the DNA because that's already out there, and it's ooh. Hi, Pointer Lover. I'm very curious. Hi, Barbie Cop. So, if you're good, I'd like to go for that first.
Sure, wherever you want to go.
Okay, so all of these that have the new were dropped today.
Yeah, and then there was another set that dropped overnight last night that I'd sent you. So it's like on top of that, I think, I don't know, Harley, what did we say? It was like over 20 last night. It was quite a bit on top of these. So all of these motions eliminate from the defense.
Holy
There
moly.
was already the state's motions eliminate, which we didn't get to read yet. We did talk a little bit about what we were seeing coming up, but we didn't get into it. And then I think the only other thing that we were noticing that we went through was the order on defendants. So, okay, so when we went over the Franks hearing,
Mm-hmm.
Scarlett, or sorry, Harlot, I don't want to call her Scarlett. Harlot and I went through the order on defendants motion to suppress AT&T, Google, USB, Apple, and Amazon, which I don't know if we really want to go all the way back to that, given that we got some stuff coming in there, but there's a lot of good information that may be worth something separate for us to go through because it talks through like the email addresses that Bryan was using,
Yeah.
the click data with Amazon, also that like around like 4:40 in the morning that he accessed a recovery email address that's linked to one of his main accounts. So that
So,
one is really, really big.
yeah. No, we'll end up getting through all of them. It's kind of just like what's the order we want to go through them. Uh there is so much. Hi,
The
Wolfie.
alibi stuff is big too. Like with the
Yeah,
state's motions, I do think those are important.
and I want to see the autism. Oh my god, there's just so much. I really don't know where to start. Um
So I think the defense motions will probably recap a lot of what we saw in the orders. But the nice thing about the orders were they were written by the judge, so they were they were collaborative of what he's seen in evidence and what's been testified against.
okay, so it was around here that we last left off.
Yeah,
Order
but
sealing
that.
exhibits. What?
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I was just reading.
Yeah, I think you want to go into the DNA, so we can hold off on the Amazon stuff if you want.
Yeah, I definitely want to see psychiatric evidence. Like, I want to get into all of it. I just want to go and let me see which one is it. Alibi, motion to strike, in support of the limines, autism spectrum, motion to file limine.
So that one right there, motion to strike death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
That one should be the one you were looking for.
Yeah, for the autism, definitely. I want to. Is this the? No, this is exclude IgG. Improper expert testimony. Amazon click.
No, the
Unnoticed 104.
I think the Riley Nolan one was the one that um, had some of the DNA, if I'm correct, and the witness identification one by Bushy Eyebrows. I know Harlot went over that one, and she said it has a lot of good information too.
Okay.
But what if
Let's.
we just go down the
Mhm.
list?
Well, I really want to read this one because it's hard to. I know we're not going to get through obviously not going to get through all these tonight. And so there's the ones that have been all over my feed and it's been really hard to avoid. And so I want to read. There's a couple I want to read right off the bat. And so I'll pull up the motion in limine number 6, which is reference to touch and contact DNA. So I'm just writing it down so I know. Limine number 6. Rylene. And Rylene was one of the witnesses that we had just read for, guys, in that latest sealed hearing. Touch and contact DNA. Okay.
Yes.
Oh goodness, there's going to be I'm so very excited for this. And thank you, Jack, for the gifted memberships. Welcome to our 2 new members. Please make sure you thank Jack. Welcome. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm beyond ecstatic right now, like to just I don't know, just to have come this far and to finally be getting some answers. I'm ecstatic. All right. So can everyone see this?
Yes.
All right, so let's see. This is the motion in limine number 6, Rylene, and reference to touch and contact DNA. So this comes now. Bryan Kohberger, by and through his attorney, moves this honorable court for an order in limine excluding the testimony of Rylene Nolan and any testimony, 1, referencing the terms touch or contact DNA, or 2, purporting to be an opinion of the means or mechanism for DNA being placed on the sheath by any witness called to testify about DNA. Both the term touch or contact DNA or any opinion regarding how DNA ends up on an item is misleading in that it assumes facts that must be proven, would be confusing to the jury, and waste substantial time in debunking the testimony of an expert that is outside the purview of the field expertise and qualifications. So pause right there already. That makes sense to me. Like, you're getting into I understand possibilities you absolutely want to get into. Is this possible? Is it possible that this DNA got there from this method? But it would take a bunch of time going into hypotheticals versus proving that something like that happened.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So it says, furthermore, the opinions of this expert has not been disclosed to Mr. Kohberger. As set forth below, the how and when of DNA arrives on an object cannot be scientifically determined and is not the proper subject of expert testimony. The use of this language confuses and misleads the finder of fact and is barred by the rules 402 and 403, as well as due process, in that the evidence is overly prejudicial. The erroneous admission of irrelevant and prejudicial evidence will offend due process when it renders a trial fundamentally unfair. Where did the one go? Did I? No. Okay. So relevant facts are a knife sheath that was recovered, tucked under the covers next to Miss Mogen at 1122 King Road on November 13th, 2022. The sheath was tested using standard DNA STR methods by the Idaho State Police Lab. Item Q1.1, a swab from the sheath resulted in a single source male DNA. This profile was uploaded to the CODIS DNA database and resulted in no hits to known offenders. In its disclosures, the government has indicated that Rylene from the ISP lab will testify as follows, but I just want to jump up. The government has indicated that these terms will be used at trial. Okay. The exact location of the sheath is unclear in both photographs of the room and in the written description of its location. The body cam footage of one of the first officers on scene shows the sheath tucked under the covers next to Miss Mogen. When item Q1.1 was tested for DNA, it was never subjected to standard biological testing for the presence of blood or saliva. In one exchange of emails, Rylene described the swabbing as being of the leather strap and internal metal area of the snap. The snap itself may not have been swabbed at all for DNA. The defense has no ability to retest based on the fingerprint process on the sheath. The other two male profiles, identified in the ISP reports as unknown B and unknown D, were never run through CODIS or subjected to IgG testing. The defense has never received an explanation as to why these two male profiles were not further investigated. Okay, interesting. All right, Shay, you want to read the next page? Oh, and thank you, Lady F&T, for becoming a member. Thank you so much, hon.
So Ms. Nolan will also testify to touch DNA and transfer of DNA. Specifically, Nolan will testify to the characteristics and nature of touch DNA, including how it is deposited and transferred to an item of evidence, the methods used to collect and preserve touch DNA samples from items of evidence, the procedures and protocols used by forensic scientists to extract and analyze touch DNA, the manner in which results from touch DNA samples are interpreted, and the reliability of touch DNA analysis and its acceptability in the field of forensic science. Nolan will also testify to the potential for DNA to transfer between an individual and an objects, including the distinction between primary and secondary transfer and the factors influencing the likelihood of transfer. On February 17, 2025, the state produced a second round of disclosures, including one from Riley Nolan, Exhibit S11. As with the first disclosure, the focus of the second disclosure is touch/contact DNA and direct versus indirect transfer. Although conceding that currently DNA technology cannot conclusively answer the question, the state offers the following opinion. Many complicated factors can influence the likelihood of transfer of DNA and the persistence of the transferred DNA after deposition. Current DNA technology cannot conclusively answer the question of when DNA was deposited on an item or by what mechanism, i.e., direct or indirect transfer. It is possible the DNA detected on M2022-4843, item 1.1, resulted from secondary transfer. However, based on Nolan's training and experience, it is her opinion, given the quantity of DNA detected on M2022-4843, item 1.01, and given the DNA profile obtained is single source, it is more likely the result of a direct transfer. And then what is 5? Okay, so the government did not indicate what her opinion on any of these matters is, leaving the defense as substantial disadvantage as to properly challenge the testimony other than in a general way. If the court is inclined to deny this motion, Mr. Kohberger would ask for the court hold an evidentiary hearing to explore Ms. Nolan's potential testimony in this regard. Argument. You want to go?
Yeah, you can read that line.
Introduction of the concept of touch DNA and transfer opinions.
So this is going to be. I see what they're like. The point that they're already trying to. Well, Wolfie, is that your cat? If so, mute.
Okay.
She didn't have to leave. She could have just muted. But I see this is going to be an issue and a battle of possibilities. You know, could it have possibly been there from this, or could you prove it came there from this? And if they can't prove, I see what they're trying to do. Okay. I'm sorry, my brain's processing as we're reading it.
Well, I think that the fact that it's been single source had led me to believe that it was a direct transfer, but
Yeah.
I'm very curious.
Mm-hmm.
Right. All right, so for arguments, introduction to the concept of touch DNA and transfer opinions. The terms touch and contact DNA came into use as the forensic community shifted from the testing of obvious identifiable stains such as blood or semen to samples that cannot be identified via a biological test based on the increasing sensitivity of DNA tests. Samples such as swabs from steering wheels of a carjacked vehicle or window jambs in a burglary were collected and tested on the theory that a person would have in contact with the object and left DNA behind in the form of skin or other cells, hence the terms touch or contact. The forensic community began to conduct research into the question of how DNA in the form of biological material moves in the environment. And this research led to the conclusion that it is impossible to determine how a particular deposit of DNA came to be on an object. In 2013, an article which reviewed the state of the research at the time made the following conclusions. Full DNA profiles can be recovered from items that have not been touched but have been in the vicinity of someone's speaking or coughing. It is not possible to establish from the amount of DNA recovered from a surface whether the DNA was deposited there by a single touch or by regular use. It is not possible to use the amount of DNA recovered from an item of interest to inform whether the DNA was deposited by direct contact or indirect transfer. It is impossible to know from the quality of a DNA profile obtained whether the DNA was deposited by direct contact or indirect transfer. And then cites G. Meekin and A. Jameson, DNA transfer review and implications for casework, forensic science. The authors introduced the concept of trace DNA, defined DNA that cannot yet be attributed to an identifiable body fluid. The authors rejected the term touch DNA as misleading, as such a term infers that the DNA recovered from a surface got there via the surface being touched, but this is usually not known. The review was followed by a similar review article by a different group of scientists 6 years later, which reached similar conclusions. Appropriately trained forensic practitioners are best placed to provide opinion and guidance on the interpretation of profiles at the activity level. However, those requested to provide expert opinion on DNA-related activity level issues are often insufficiently trained to do so. We advocate recognition of DNA activity associated expertise to be distinct from expertise associated with the identification of individuals. This is to be supported by dedicated training, competency testing, authorization, and regular fit for purpose proficiency testing. And then in Oshert's DNA transfer and forensic science, a review, the term activity level refers to the question of the when and how of what happened, such how did the DNA come to be an object and how long had it been there. Examples of indirect transfer of what might be characterized as touch or contact DNA are numerous and are summarized in the 2 review articles described above. Van Oorschot, I don't know, discussed the use of the term touch DNA as one that could be misleading as it implies a specific mode of action and to some degree also type of biological source. Using a less descriptive term such as trace DNA is more appropriate to be used in casework when the source and mode of deposition are unknown. The article is an illustration of how extremely complex the question of how and when is given the identification of a sample that has no biological source such as blood. Van Orsch also summarized the routes of transfer considered in the body of research in the illustration below, which includes the diagram.
Okay, so we have direct deposition, which is the primary transfer. We have the originating biological material touching the transferred biological material. Indirect, which is secondary, right? You have this would be like the person touching the sheath. Then you have I'm sorry. Originating by, okay, like skin cells, transferred biological material directly, and this is directly, and then that's a little bit confusing. I understand what they're saying, but at least as far as like this key, it's a little bit confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Originating biological material, okay. Transferred biological material, okay, transferred onto. Indirect, secondary transfer, transferring onto it, and then from there transferring onto another object, and then so forth and so forth.
Right.
Bidirectional transfer.
I think it just keeps kind of breaking down how it can transfer between sources.
All right. It says, despite this wealth of information and scientific study, the authors conclude that more work is necessary and that the expertise to offer activity level opinions, the how and the when, is beyond the expertise of crime lab analysts. Then in 2024, NIST, the National Institutes of Standards, published a document entitled Forensic DNA Interpretation and Human Factors, Improving Practice Through a Systems Approach. This document was the result of extensive work and years of public review and comment. The expert working group on human factors and forensic DNA interpretation began work in 2020 with the goal of, quote, recommending strategies for improving the production, evaluation, and communication of DNA results. The EWG consists of experts in the field of forensics DNA and was subject to repeated rounds of public comment from the greater forensic community. Most notably for this court, the EWG addressed the question of transfer and the ability of experts to proffer opinions. The EWG addressed the following question. But a further important question is what activities led to the presence of that DNA? With the increased sensitivity of DNA techniques and sophisticated software, a DNA profile may be developed even when the contributor of that DNA never touched the item or area that was swabbed. Alternatively, a person's DNA may be present when they were not involved in the crime. Therefore, considering how or when the DNA may have been deposited or why it was not recovered can be vital. So, quote, except in ground truth known experiments where an individual is observed to have been in contact with a surface or location, it is not possible to know whether the transfer was direct or indirect. The assessment of what is called TPPR, which is transfer, persistence, prevalence, and recovery, is a, quote, separate skill distinct from standard DNA profiling and interpretation. There are not adequate educational opportunities to inform these types of issues within the United States. The EWG concluded that an expert rarely, if ever, has all the information needed to perform a robust, balanced, and transparent evaluation of biological results regarding transfer or specific activities on the witness stand. The EWG offered proposed responses to questions of how and when DNA arrived on an object, none of which included a statement of how, and then proposed responses to questions about how or when the DNA was deposited. So
I
the
don't
only
think we have to go through that.
no. The only conclusion that this court can draw is that opinions regarding the means and manner in which DNA was deposited on an item is not considered a proper topic of expert opinion for a DNA analysis and likely to lead to undue prejudice to Mr. Kohberger and would render his trial fundamentally unfair. So then you could read B.
This court must exclude the opinion of Riley Nolan. As set forth above, an expert cannot offer opinions within their expertise. The expertise of the typical lab analyst is not sufficient to allow them to be considered an expert in the area of mechanism of DNA transfer. Nolan's disclosure concedes as much in that she acknowledges that current methods cannot conclusively offer an answer to the question of when and how. Nolan cannot be allowed to substitute her judgment in the face of the weight of the forensic community's agreement that the science and literature does not support any analyst testifying about the when and how transfer. The opinion falls outside the norm of forensic DNA experts and would be highly speculative. Given the nature of the opinion proffered and the recommendation in the NIST Human Factors Report, this opinion would be highly speculative. In addition, it would have the tendency to mislead and confuse the jury and would require undue consumption of time to refute with the scientific articles and reports that clearly conflict with this proffered testimony. C. This disclosure is not proper rebuttal testimony. Nolan's disclosure contains an opinion that is not rebuttal, but appears to be the state's theory of the case, that the DNA from Mr. Kohberger arrived on the knife sheath via direct contact. A close reading of the disclosure for Mr. Kohberger's DNA witness, Dr. Ruth Ballard, does not contain any opinion regarding the how and when the DNA arrived on the sheath. This testimony should be excluded. This court must exclude the use of the terms touch or contact DNA. Under IRE 403, this court may exclude the use of terms touch or contact DNA if its probative value is substantially outweighed by a danger of one or more of the following unfair prejudice: confusing the issues, misleading the jury, undue delay, wasting time, or needlessly presenting cumulative evidence. IRE 403. This rule requires the court to balance the probative value of the evidence against the danger that the evidence may be unfairly prejudicial. In State versus Johnson, Idaho, blah, blah, blah. Here, the terms touch and contact are misleading in that the forensic community has determined through empirical research that it is not possible for a DNA expert to testify as to how DNA was deposited on an item. The two terms insinuate that the deposit must have come from direct contact with an object rather than the myriad other possible means of transfer documented in the literature. Yeah, I don't think that's.
I get what they're saying.
You want to take that one?
Furthermore, allowing testimony regarding the manner in which the DNA was deposited on the sheath would implicate the same concerns that the use of the two terms touch and contact invoke. The forensic community consensus and an extensive body of research shows that the how and when opinions in DNA testing far exceeds the expertise of a DNA analysis and are not founded in science. In this case, the only DNA evidence that implicates Mr. Kohberger is the DNA found on the sheath found in the residence. From the lab reports and notes, as well as recent testimony by Riley Nowlin, it appears that at the sample Q1.1 was a swabbing of the leather strap of the sheath, as well as the interior of the snap, not the outer snap surface, which apparently was not sampled in order to preserve the surface for fingerprinting. No serological testing was done on the area swabbed for Q1.1 to identify any biological material. An area identified as Q1.4, quote, swabs of stains on back of the sheath, tested presumptively positive for blood and was DNA tested. Mr. Kohberger was excluded from this particular sample, which was identified as a mixture ISP lab report XYZ. Thus, the government has the burden to prove the when and how of the DNA identified in Q1.1. Allowing the use of these two terms would mislead the jury to believe that there was evidence to support the conclusion of direct contact, when in fact there is no direct evidence. The admission of these terms would lead to a substantial waste of time, in that it would require not only extensive cross-examination of the government's witnesses on the topic, but also rebuttal testimony from defense experts on this question. Furthermore, the use of this language would unfairly prejudice Mr. Kohberger. Unfair prejudice is prejudice that tends to suggest a decision on an improper basis. If the language is used, the jury might well believe through expert testimony, as opposed to factual testimony, that Mr. Kohberger left his DNA on the sheath via direct contact, a fact that the government must prove. As a consequence, there is a danger that the jury would reach a decision on an improper basis due to evidence that is unfairly prejudicial.
In conclusion, as set forth above, the forensic community has come to a consensus that DNA analysts do not have the expertise to render opinions on how and when a DNA sample arrived on an object. In addition to being misled and inaccurate, allowing such testimony would result in an undue consumption of time. This type of opinion testimony would not satisfy IRE 703, and that the expert cannot be qualified to proffer such an opinion because it falls outside the expert's specialized knowledge. The question of how and when is not for lab analysts, and as the EWG points out, there's no training program to the United States that would provide expertise for such an opinion. Mr. Kohberger respectfully requests this court grant his motion in limine to exclude any use of the language touch and contact in the context of the DNA testing of the sheath, and any opinion of how and when the DNA on the sheath was deposited.
Okay, interesting. And thank you so much, Kimmy, for your support. And like Harlot, I saw Harlot answer, Bryan Kohberger stood silent. So he did not, they automatically enter a plea of not guilty when you stand silent. Hi, Carrie. So the next one I wanted to pull up was the motion in limine regarding the inconclusive data. So motion in limine number 5, inconclusive. And this is the one that I wanted to go over. It says, come now, Bryan C. Kohberger, by through his attorneys, moves the court for an order of limiting testimony about the statistical analysis of the item Q13.1, fingernail scrapings. So allowing such testimony would violate Mr. Kohberger's federal and state constitutional rights to due process, a fair trial, effective assistance of counsel, and confrontation of witnesses. This motion is based on 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution, Idaho Constitution, XYZ. So the requested limits are made to secure fairness in administration, to end the truth may be ascertained in proceedings justly determined. Okay, so the statement of fact says, in grand jury testimony, Jade Miller testified as to the results of testing done on item Q13.1, which was a swab of the left fingernail clippings of Madison Mogen. The data consisted of 3-person mixture. The statistic, the likelihood ratio, was calculated assuming that Maddie was a contributor to her own fingernails. Okay, so Miller testified that Maddie Mogen as followed, and we have it redacted. It says the data from that sample was redacted as to Mr. Kohberger. Grand jury transcript at 365, 366. Miller testified that inconclusive means that an analyst is redacted. So, grand jury transcript at 366, Miller went on to explain that the likelihood ratio for Mr. Kohberger redacted, grand jury transcript at 367. Okay, so before we continue, inconclusive, and I did, watch just Court TV's just a little bit of it. Okay, just that. That's all I did. But I knew that this, because I already see we got JLR going saying that they found Kohberger's DNA underneath Maddie's fingernail. No, I also see people saying that it isn't. It says it doesn't. It's inconclusive. So people need. This is why we need to be very careful with this. They cannot determine if it's a match, and they can't exclude it as being a match either. It's inconclusive. So it very well may be, it very well may not be, but there is a mixture. Maddie would be contained as one of them. And let's just say possibly Kohberger, there's still another person's DNA underneath it. But we have to also remember, is that so unlikely when they were out at the bar, they were out at the food truck stop? Like, what's the likelihood that she wouldn't have a mixture of DNA underneath her nails?
Right. And I would go as far as to say that if she was incapacitated while she was asleep, she may not have any defensive wounds or grabbed on the perpetrator. So,
right. So we don't know either way. That's all that means, guys. It's inconclusive. They can't say either way. But there's another person's DNA. That doesn't mean that person had anything to do with the crime. Or it's possible. It's inconclusive. It's inconclusive.
I guess my thinking is, if this is the defense's motion in limine that they filed, why would they want to keep it out if it could lead to possible doubt,
I think because it could swing either way, maybe. I think not necessarily that I can't cause reasonable doubt, versus I think she probably doesn't have many moments of reasonable doubt, I think. And so I think she's trying to keep everything close to her chest. So when it comes out, it's that impact, that initial impact. Because there's no telling that a juror, everything that is released, jurors can know, And if you take away any moment of impact by bringing something out that a juror wouldn't know, I don't know. Or else why? It can't exclude him, but it can't include him either. It's.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I haven't read ahead. I'm curious what her argument says.
Yeah. Okay. So go ahead. You could read the argument.
Okay. The use of misleading language confuses and misleads the finder of fact and is barred by the rules 402, 403, as well as due process, and that the evidence is overly prejudicial. The erroneous admission of irrelevant and prejudicial evidence will offend the due process when it renders a trial fundamentally unfair. Here, expanding beyond the language of the report would prejudice Mr. Kohberger, and that it might allow the jury to infer that the inconclusive data would mean that he might be included. LRs are different from traditional statistics that courts and juries are used to seeing and hearing. The LR is a comparison of a hypothesis. It is not a statement of identity or probability of identity. It simply asks the question, given the data, which hypothesis tested it more likely? For item Q13.1, both hypotheses tested for each individual assume that Maddie Mogen's DNA was present. So when the lab generated an LR laid out above, the hypotheses tested were Maddie Mogen, Kaylee, and one unknown unrelated person versus Maddie Mogen and two unrelated persons. The comparison was done for all the individuals listed in report number 7 and for Mr. Kohberger in report number 26. At the ISP lab, any number greater than 100 is considered a conclusive result indicating inclusion. Any number less than 0.01 is considered a conclusive result indicating exclusion. Thus, if an LR falls within the range of 0.01 to 100, the lab cannot draw any conclusions and the data is reported as inconclusive. In her testimony, Miller did not provide a full context to the analysis. The lab reported a series of LRs for item 13.1, including an LR of 0.399 for blank, 0.485 for blank, 0.20 for blank, 0.0233 for blank, lab report number 7 at 3. All of these individuals sit in the same shoes as Mr. Kohberger, namely that the LR is exclusionary but falls in the range of inconclusive. Of interest,
No, I'm just absorbing.
of interest is that when an LR was calculated for blank blank, thus Mr. Kohberger's inconclusive LR is similar to almost every other person for whom an LR was generated, and focusing on his inconclusive LR would mislead the jury. In that, it implies that the LR means that Mr. Kohberger's DNA might be present in the sample. The court should exclude testimony such as redacted. More importantly, Mr. Kohberger has disclosed that through further independent laboratory testing, he is eliminated as a contributor to item 13.1. When Mr. Kohberger sought to overturn the grand jury indictment, he argued that Miller's testimony was inadmissible and misleading. The state argued that the testimony was presented to the grand jury as exculpatory and an effort to elicit favorable evidence from Mr. Kohberger. The independent lab testing conducted by the defense related to item 13.1 is indeed exculpatory. Mr. Kohberger is excluded, and the state should be precluded from misleading the jury in any way. In conclusion, a fair trial is mandated by Mr. Kohberger's federal and state constitutional rights to due process, a fair trial, effective assistance of a counsel, and confrontation of witnesses. The U.S. Constitution amendments, expert testimony properly elicited must be excluded. So how is it that they're saying that they were able to exclude him?
That's what I was gonna. Okay. And thank you so much, Kimmy Shore. Welcome. We have 5 new members. Thank you so much. It's very kind. So that's what I want to be very careful about, because that is Anne's argument. That is her argument. And that's a great question, Shay. How did they wait, look at that tricky little sentence in there. Mr. Kohberger is excluded, and the state should be precluded from misleading the jury in any way. None of that came from the lab testing. It is inconclusive. You can't make that jump when you literally started this argument with explaining the numbers of what makes it inclusive and what makes it inconclusive, like conclusive and inconclusive. And you can't determine on your own when the lab can't. The lab themselves says inconclusive, but you can't say, well, he's excluded because it's within a range that I think he should be excluded. What? Mm-hmm. The independent lab testing conducted by the defense team is indeed exculpatory. Mr. Kohberger is I don't know about that, unless she's we would have to see what was that independent testing.
Yeah, I was looking to see if there was something filed that included those exhibits. I'm really curious.
Hi,
Huh.
Penelope. Hi, anybody who came in.
Yeah, I'd like to know why. It's fascinating.
So just understand, Anne is getting hung up that she does not want them to say that they can't exclude Kohberger.
Right.
So they tested it as if Maddie was one DNA, Kaylee was one DNA, and then there was a one unknown unrelated person, or Maddie and then two unrelated persons. This comparison was done for all the individuals. Okay. Any number greater than 100, conclusive. Any number less than 0.01, indicating exclusion. Okay. Thus, if it falls within a range of 0.01 to 100, the lab cannot draw conclusions. What was Kohberger's? See, you threw out all the numbers for these people, but you only gave us, he falls in the range. What? What's his number? What, you were able to give precise numbers for all four of those other people who
Well,
come back
that's
inconclusive.
well, that's what they're saying Miller's testimony was. So at the bottom is whenever they said they had it tested, but they don't provide
Right.
a number or a range.
Right. You just have all of these individuals sit in the same shoes as Mr. Kohberger, namely that the LR is exclusionary but falls in the range of inconclusive. But you never give us Kohberger's range. You give us everyone else's range, but not Kohberger's.
Right. Maybe it'll come out. Maybe it'll come out in court whenever they're heard on these motions for them
Yeah.
being or heard. Sorry.
Hi, Samantha. Hi, King Scarlet. She can't, listen, if they can't exclude Kohberger, they can't exclude Kohberger. Again, that doesn't mean it is his DNA. And I understand her argument of, well, hey, Kohberger wasn't the only one who came back inconclusive. These four others came back. I get that argument. But at the end of the day, they have their own terminology. The same way with like Blue Star in Letitia Stauch's case. They could not tell you that it was blood. They could only tell you that it had a reaction, a presumptive reaction to what's within blood. The chemicals, what's a chemical reaction to what blood is made up of. The lab is the same way. If they can't exclude, they can't exclude. But you can't say, hey, you can't present that. How else do you want them to present it? It's not Kohberger. They can't say that. It is Kohberger. They can't say that. All that they could say is they can't exclude that it's him and present the numbers.
Oh. So everybody's just kind of running with us at this point. It's not really. Okay, then.
And the redactions matter. Hell yeah, King Scarlet. Shay, there's so much. I don't even know what to do. So we read these two, number 6 and number 5. Should we do the witness identification by bushy eyebrows?
I was gonna say, okay, do we just want to focus on the defense's motions in limine this time and do the states next time? Because I don't want to go all over the place.
I don't feel like I'm going all over the place.
No, my mind is, not you. I'm over here like looking at everything like, ooh, squirrel. That's 2.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the inflammatory evidence. I think that's good. Let's do it. It's not you, Melissa. It's me. I'm scrolling.
Bushy eyebrows. No, there's so much, but if I do it in order, I'm not going to get to the stuff that I want to at least get to tonight. And there's no way I could keep up. It's kind of like not watching a new episode or the season finale of like Game of Thrones, and you cannot go on the internet because it's everywhere. Spoilers are everywhere. That's what's happening to me. So I want to at least get to the ones that I'm really interested in. That's what I said. Brandon, did I say something different? Sorry, did I say something different, Brandon? They tested Maddie against possibly Kaylee and an unknown, unrelated person, and then Maddie against 2 unknown, unrelated people. So, I mean, we read it for what it was. I didn't say anything different.
We're just reading the court documents. We're not trying to infer otherwise. I mean, we don't work in that field.
Well, I know I didn't say anything different. So, I know. That's what I'm saying. I'm so excited, but I already know what's out, and I'm like, oh my god, like there's certain ones I need to know about right now. But we could stick with defense. That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Because that's what's probably going to get the most buzz, but I still think the state stuff is important for us to go over
oh,
too.
hell yeah. It all is. I want to go over all of it. Like I'm not going to skip any of them. So this is the motion in limine number 7, witness identification by bushy eyebrows. Now, this was a big thing, okay? So this is excluding any evidence referencing bushy eyebrows. More specifically, the defense asserts that rules 403, 601, 602, Idaho rules of evidence bar witness Dylan from using the words bushy eyebrows or identifying Mr. Kohberger in that manner. So you want to read the introduction?
Sure. And Brady just said he came in late. He didn't hear the first part of what you said. Okay, so for introduction, the issue of witness identification is a critical one in a trial that is the subject of much litigation. That is because the reliability of witness identification, quote, is the linchpin in determining the admissibility of identification information, unquote, State versus Hoisington. Failure to challenge unreliable witness identification can result in finding that the trial counsel's performance was deficient and provide a basis for overturning a conviction. In Wordman versus State, in this case, the description provided by Dylan Mortensen is unreliable and should be excluded. Although she has never identified Mr. Kohberger, testimony by Dylan Mortensen from the witness stand describing bushy eyebrows while Mr. Kohberger sits as the accused at trial will be as damning as her pointing to him and saying, he is the man that did this.
Really? Really? Okay, like that's a little bit of a jump. But to be fair, like that is, he was wearing a mask. And if that was something, and I know it sounds silly to all of us, but if that was the only thing that kind of stood out to her, given that was the only part of his freaking face that was shown, I can understand. Okay, the eyebrows are what stood out, you know, but it's a little extreme. Hi, FOS.
I mean, it's not like she picked him in a lineup. I mean,
Yeah.
they could easily like have her on the stand and, you know, refute that.
Right.
But anyways.
Oh my.
When considering whether identification by a witness is reliable, the Idaho Supreme Court has applied the Manson-Biggers balancing test, which looks at 1, the opportunity of the witness to view the criminal at the time of the crime. 2, the witness's degree of attention. 3, the accuracy of the witness's prior description of the criminal. 4, the level of certainty demonstrated at the identification. And 5, the length of time between the crime and the identification. Wordman versus State, citing State versus Trevino. When the Manson-Biggers balancing test is applied to the facts of this case, the reliability of the witness identification is non-existent. Dylan Mortensen is the only person alive who is known to have seen the intruder. She only saw the intruder briefly.
No naked man running across the front yard? Oh, look at that.
Oh, Lordy. Her recollection or lack thereof is filled with uncertainty, fuzziness, and the influence of alcohol, dreaming, and sleepiness. She did not see the intruder well enough to describe him to a composite artist. After Mr. Kohberger was arrested, she did not recognize him from a photo.
Again, to be fair, if he was covered and the only portion of his face that was seen was, I don't blame her. I wouldn't be able to either. Also taking into account the trauma of it and the what's happening, confusion. How are you supposed to say what a face looks like when most of it was covered?
Right?
But okay. We have sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it. I was just saying relevant facts.
Relevant facts. A. Bushy eyebrows. Interviews on November 13th. Dylan was inside the house when the murders occurred and saw a figure dressed in black, hereinafter intruder, when she peeked at her bedroom door around 4 a.m. Shortly after seeing the intruder, she went downstairs. Wow.
I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it.
Oh, no.
I knew it. Yes, I knew it. Sorry.
Shay, she was.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. I knew she did because that's why they were downstairs to the first floor.
Oh, okay. Okay. Bethany was the only one who fucking answered.
Dude, I'm telling you, I thought so because remember at the
Mhm.
beginning of all this, it was they were on the first floor. Everybody thought they were on the first floor.
Yep,
And
yep.
then she first fell asleep in her bedroom.
Wow. Okay. All right. Shortly after seeing the intruder, she went downstairs to Bethany's room. What? The two girls fell asleep? Ooh. Okay, all right. I'll react after. The two girls fell asleep. Roughly 8 hours later, a 911 call was made from Bethany's phone at 11:56 a.m. More than 8
Bethany's phone.
Bethany's phone.
Wow, I thought it was Dylan's phone. Interesting.
More than 8 hours after seeing the intruder, Dylan was interviewed by law enforcement at the scene and the police department. It was confusing to Dylan that the intruder looked at her, but did not come towards her or say anything. I told you, Shay. Oh, we're both like, When describing the intruder to Officer Nunez at the scene, she described the height, build, and clothing of the intruder. Her description did not mention eyebrows. When she called Bethany before going downstairs to Bethany's room, Dylan said that she was kind of in and out of it. I was really tired. Later, when she was interviewed at the police department, Detective Mowry inquired about facial features and asked Dylan if she knew what color the intruder's eyebrows were. She did not know the color of the intruder's eyes or eyebrows. Everything was kind of blurry, like I don't fully remember it. During the Mowry interview, Dylan again mentioned that she was in and out of it because she was so tired. So, pictures on November 13th, law enforcement took pictures of Dylan's room on the 13th and the 19th. On the walls in her room were many pictures of eyes with prominent eyebrows, many of which she had drawn. Some of the eyebrows are heavy, voluminous, puffy, or perhaps subjectively bushy.
What?
Oh. According to Detective Lake, he found, quote, artwork of human figures with an emphasis upon the eyes and eyebrows were pinned to cork boards. 3. Interview on the 17th. 4 days later, Dylan was interviewed by Detective Gooch and indicated that she was really asleep and probably very drunk when she woke up around 4 a.m. Throughout the interview, Dylan expressed uncertainty about what she heard and saw and did not know if it was real or if it was a dream or if her mind was playing with her. It just doesn't make sense. Dylan described the intruder and told Detective Gooch that she recalls seeing his eyebrows, his bushy eyebrows, but she did not recall the color of his eyebrows. She did not remember the eyes or the mouth, just the eyebrows. When she saw the intruder, she thought that the intruder was about 3 feet away from her, but that could be off since she was still a little bit drunk. She did not think that she could remember enough to give composite for a composite artist. She could really just recall the bushy eyebrows, but not the shape or color of them. In this interview, Detective Gooch asked if Dylan had anxiety, which led to Dylan stating that she had a lot of lucid dreams of being kidnapped or chased. She indicated that she watched Criminal Minds and fell asleep to crime podcasts. These lucid dreams began in high school. The interview on December 1st, a half of a month later, Dylan was interviewed again and described this intruder. She did not see his eyes, but she saw one eyebrow or two, but it was just like this bushy brow. I could just see like an eyebrow, this bushy eyebrow. She did not remember the color or the shape of the eyebrow. She just remembered it being bushy. She did not remember if she saw one eyebrow or two. Throughout the interview, Dylan indicated that she had always had really bad dreams, lucid dreams, and scary dreams. She did not know what parts of her recollections were dreams and what parts were real. When she woke up that morning, the morning of November 13th, she did not fully understand what was a dream or not. In this interview, she indicated that she thought that the person she saw was a fireman. What? He had to be dressed in something.
Like a jumpsuit.
Yep. So the statement and affidavit to support the arrest warrant on December 29th, a statement submitted by law enforcement in support of the arrest warrant used descriptive information from Dylan's interviews. Quote, Dylan described the figure as 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. 6, interview on December 30th. After the arrest of Mr. Kohberger, Dylan was interviewed by Detective Lake and Detective Tolson. When she learned that an arrest had been made, she found a mugshot of Mr. Kohberger online. When asked if Mr. Kohberger was the person that she saw in the house, she did not know if Mr. Kohberger was the intruder. She knew that the intruder had looked at her because of the bushy eyebrow. Quote, all that she remembered is some bushy eyebrow and all black and some sort of mask. 7, grand jury testimony on May 15, 2023. Subsequently, Dylan provided grand jury testimony and was questioned about what the intruder was wearing. She was again uncertain, and that testimony is attached but not quoted verbatim here. Wow, that is...
Whoa.
There is a lot to unpack there.
Well, I mean, I've always thought that the most important part with Dylan and Bethany would have been the cell phones, because that's the way it was worded in the PCA. Because most eyewitness testimony isn't very reliable, you know?
Right.
But I'm just shocked. But I'm not. I am, but I'm not. I don't know what to think. I'm processing. Okay, ready?
Yeah, well, 1 second. Sorry, because I'm still... There was so much in there. She walked out of her room, and to get down, you guys have to understand, I need to know if that door, I believe that door was shut based on what we know. But was there any blood? Oh,
wait, what do you mean? What door was shut?
Xana's room.
I believe the door was shut.
We believe based on only what we heard through a News Nation interview. Remember? But then we know the next day it was open by the time, which makes sense based on that interview, you know, what we heard by the time investigators got on scene. But I have a lot of questions. Because if that backsliding door was left open, okay, so she didn't fully watch him leave. She went back in her room. She shut that door. But then when she did go out, you're telling me you wouldn't feel how fucking free, you would know that door was open. It was freezing.
But when it said the intruder left, maybe they heard a car leave and then she went downstairs. I don't know. I mean, we don't really know.
All I know though is when she went out of her room, she would have known that that backslider door was open. And she still walked around like,
Unless she just darted. I don't know.
okay. All right. Go
Okay.
ahead.
B, reliability of witness identification. 1, opportunity to view. Dylan Mortensen peeked out of her bedroom door 3 times after 4 a.m. on November 13th, 2022. The third time she saw a figure dressed in black. At the scene, she described the intruder as he was a little bit taller than me and I couldn't really see much of him, but I'm almost positive he was wearing a full black outfit and he had this mask that was just over his forehead and over his mouth, and he didn't say anything to me like at all, unquote. At the police department, her description of the intruder was similar. And then I opened the door again, and the guy is right there. And he's maybe my height, a few inches taller, not like skinny, athletic build. He has all black. He's wearing this mask that covers just his forehead and here, and it goes like around. He was white. There was no lights on the stairs. Dylan Mortensen was uncertain whether either the kitchen light or the bathroom light was on. The kitchen light may have been on, but the twinkle lights in the living room may have been on.
Wait. There were no lights on the stairs. Dylan was uncertain whether either the kitchen light or the bathroom light was on. The kitchen light may have been on, but the twinkle lights in the living room may have been. Okay. Okay. Because I was really interested in the lighting. Okay.
Right. 2, degree of attention. Dylan Mortensen acknowledged that her brain might have been fuzzy due to alcohol and sleepiness when she saw the intruder. She stated that she had been drinking alcohol just prior to peeking out her bedroom door sometime around 4 a.m. and seeing an intruder. She was intoxicated when she arrived home around 1:15, 1:30-ish. She was probably, quote unquote, very drunk, unquote, and tired when she saw the intruder at 4 a.m. 3, accuracy of description. When asked if she could see the intruder's face, she testified that I wouldn't say I fully remember their face, but I remember seeing his eyebrows. So at some point, I probably did see his face and don't remember it. During other interviews, she said he was wearing a mask. 4, level of certainty. During each interview, Dylan Mortensen was uncertain. On December 30th, 2022, after the arrest of Mr. Kohberger, Dylan Mortensen was interviewed by Detective Lake and Detective Tolson. When she learned that an arrest had been made, she found a mugshot of Mr. Kohberger online. When asked if Mr. Kohberger was the person that she saw in the house, she did not know if Mr. Kohberger was the intruder. She knew that the man had looked at her because of the bushy eyebrow. All that she remembered is, quote, some bushy eyebrow and all black and some sort of mask, unquote. Several weeks after the murders, Deanne thought that the person she saw was a fireman. In her mind, Dylan thought that the intruder went out the back sliding door, but she doesn't know, quote, if he actually went out the back door, unquote. The sliding back door was not visible from the doorway of Dylan's bedroom.
Okay.
5, time between event and identification. At approximately 4 a.m. on November 13th, 2022, Dylan saw the intruder. Roughly 8 hours later, the 911 call was made. More than 8 hours after seeing the intruder, Dylan provided a very limited and uncertain description of the intruder to 2 different officers. On November 17th, 2022, 4 days later, Dylan did not think that she could sufficiently describe the intruder for a composite artist. On December 30th, 2022, after Mr. Kohberger's arrest, Dylan could not recognize Mr. Kohberger from a photo. Further, by the time that Dylan testifies at trial later this year, more than 3.5 years will have passed since the murders occurred on November 13th, 2022.
So that was kind of repetitive. Like it was all kind of, but okay. So, argument.
Oof.
Case law and Idaho criminal rules excludes evidence of bushy eyebrows with certain expectations. Every person is competent to be a witness. Incompetency determined by the court occurs when, quote, persons whom the court finds are incapable of receiving just impressions of the facts about which they are examined or of relating them accurately. Idaho law tends to favor the finding of competency. Under IRE 602, quote, a witness must have sufficient personal knowledge of the matter to which he or she is testifying. If the jury or other tier of fact could reasonably find that the witness perceived the event, evidence to prove personal knowledge may consist of the witness's own testimony. When considering whether identification by a witness is reliable, the Idaho Supreme Court has applied the Manson-Biggers balancing test, which looks at 1, the opportunity of the witness to view the criminal at the time of the crime, 2, the witness's degree of attention, 3, the accuracy of the witness's prior description of the criminal, 4, the level of certainty demonstrated at the identification, and 5, the length of time between the crime and the identification. When the Manson-Biggers balancing test is applied to the facts of this case, there is no reliable witness identification. As explained in detail above, Dylan's opportunity to view was seconds at most. Her attention was influenced by alcohol and sleepiness, and the only identifying attributes are height in relation to her own, a skinny athletic build, and a bushy eyebrow. He was wearing a mask. She has repeatedly, each time interviewed, expressed uncertainty about what she saw. These general descriptors could fit millions of individuals. Her uncertainty is repeated in each interview, and at least 8 hours passed before she interviewed the first time. 6 weeks passed before she was interviewed by law enforcement the final time, and 6 months passed when she testified before the grand jury. Balancing the Manson-Biggers factors, there is no reliability of the physical characteristics that Dylan has reported. Mr. Kohberger does not have bushy eyebrows, but the artwork on Dylan's wall and that which should draw eyes with eyebrows could be described as bushy, full, or prominent. There is a great risk that at trial in front of a jury, her testimony will be viewed as a clear identification of Mr. Kohberger. This would be a false identification and would prejudice the proceedings in a way that must be avoided.
Okay, can we just hold the front door for a second?
Yep.
Who is the judge of what is a bushy eyebrow here? Like,
I know.
I think this is funny. And then two, what would be the chance that like Bryan shows up to court with some like thinned out eyebrows, like back in the 90s where we had like a thin line,
Christina Aguilera, early
Yeah.
2000s eyebrows. Yeah. Oh my.
Lord. And I don't think it's weird that she would draw eyes and eyebrows. Like, I mean, my kids love art. They draw things that they're interested in or like what their difficult is, like what may be difficult for them. And eyes tend to be some of the hardest things to draw, in their
Yeah.
opinion, like from a couple of my kids.
Well, and again, I'm going to give some leeway here because if his face was covered, obviously the eye and eyebrow area is going to be the only thing you're going to see. So the fact that it, not so much that it's like, oh, bushy eyebrows, maybe if she had a view of his entire face, I would think that's a little bit more, but the fact that that was the only part that was visible, it's not so crazy that her eyes were drawn to that.
Well, and I don't think that we would expect her to be an identification witness. It's not like she picked him out of a lineup anyways. So I don't know if this is just like we're basically trying to take the term bushy eyebrows out, like so people don't look at his eyebrows.
Yeah, anything that could see. It's kind of like a circle argument. You're saying this could fit millions of people. It does not identify Mr. Kohberger, but don't you dare say it on the stand because the jury will identify Mr. Kohberger. What?
Carrie says if he shows up to trial with one eyebrow, I'm done.
And Harlot, I thought the same thing when they said 3.5 years, but I couldn't do math that quickly while reading at the same time because this upcoming November will be 3 years. And it should be ending around November, right?
Yes, yeah.
So where they're getting a whole extra half a year, right, Harlot? I don't know.
No telling, man. This is wild. All right. B, Rule 403 excludes evidence of bushy eyebrows as irrelevant and unfairly prejudicial. To be admissible evidence must be relevant. IRE 402. Quote, evidence is relevant if A, it has any tendency to make a fact more or less probable than it would be without the evidence, and B, the fact is of consequence in determining the action, unquote. IRE 401. Whether a fact is consequence or material is determined by its relationship to legal theories presented by the parties. In this case, evidence of, quote, bushy eyebrows, unquote, is not relevant to the crimes charged. It would not tend to make any material or disputed fact of the crimes charged in this case more probable or less probable than it would be without the evidence. The purpose of admitting such testimony is for identification purposes. Given the argument above, such testimony is inadmissible. There is no other relevant reason to allow this testimony. Under IRE 403, this court may exclude evidence related to bushy eyebrows if its probative value is substantially outweighed by a danger of one or more of the following: unfair prejudice, confusing the issues, misleading the jury, undue delay, wasting time, or needlessly presenting cumulative evidence, IRE 403. This rule requires the court to balance the probative value of the evidence against the danger that the evidence may be unfairly prejudicial. Even assuming this court concludes that the descriptive words bushy eyebrows are somehow relevant, whatever minimal probative value they may have is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice and confusion of the issues. Unfair prejudice is prejudice that tends to suggest a decision on an improper basis. Dylan could not recall enough details about the intruder to provide a description to a composite artist. Allowing her to use the descriptive words bushy eyebrows confuses the issue. If evidence of bushy eyebrows is presented to the jury might well believe that Mr. Kohberger is guilty simply because of bushy eyebrows. As a consequence, there is a danger that the jury would reach a decision on an improper basis due to evidence that is unfairly prejudicial. In conclusion, for the reasons addressed above, Mr. Kohberger respectfully requests this court grant his motion in limine to exclude Dylan from using the words bushy eyebrows to identify the intruder that she saw, and to exclude Dylan from identifying Mr. Kohberger based on bushy eyebrows. Load.
That was a lot.
Yeah, it was, man.
That was so much. Honestly, like my brain can't go. Sorry, hiccup. My brain can't even process how much information we're getting. So I'm going to have to go back and really absorb one lemonade at a time, because this is overwhelming me with too much, if that makes sense. Like I can't handle this. I have to incorporate it into my brain, because for 2 years I've been thinking about this, and laying out my working theory and what I visually imagined it, and now with this additional information, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to incorporate this new information and see how I feel about it, see how it changes my theory. It's so much,
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, 2112, for the 2112. Melissa, knowing what you know up to this point, what are your initial thoughts on who you would want on the jury panel? Old versus young, male versus female, white collar versus blue collar, all while considering tech nature of evidence. A mixture of all. And thank you so much for the support, but a mixture of all, because every generation is different. Every gender is different. Everyone has their own perspectives and experiences and knowledge. And that's what makes up a diverse group of individuals, to be able to come together and see it from all perspectives. And so I think the most fair shot he has is getting well mixed verse of jurors. What do you think, Shay?
I agree. And a couple of cases that are still pretty current that I've been following, where some jury information has come out after the case has gone to trial. Um, I've heard that, some of the jurors, if they have a technical background in some of the areas that are being discussed, they tend to imply their own experiences to the facts that are being presented. So I would maybe lean towards like not having somebody that specialize in some of these fields, like specifically, because I guess I would want the facts to be presented by the experts and refuted by experts appropriately, and not have their own personal experiences be input and try to like make sense of that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that kind of happen a few times. So I guess it's kind of a double-edged sword, having somebody that maybe works in the medical field, understands this terminology, but like, do they work in it that they're trying to like solve the case themselves in their own theories, and they're not going based off of what the states, you know, did they prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt? Like that should be followed. Like those are kind of some of the things that worry me a little bit when some jurors have some specialty skills in that. But that doesn't mean that all would be that way. But I've seen it happen in a couple of big profile cases recently that left me with a little bit of pause, because I was like, shouldn't they have been following to make sure that the state like proved their case? Because if a juror that has some special expertise is like coming up with their own theories, well then they have reasonable doubt about the state's case, and they should have um you know they should have gone with like not guilty or mistrial or whatever it may be, because they're not saying that the state proved their case. And I've seen that kind of happen, and that gives me a little pause. Hey Chase.
Absolutely.
So but I heard that
This
happened in Delphi and in Karen Reed's as well.
right. It's a great point.
I think
Hey,
a good mix
Scott.
of all of them.
And that's why I think a mix of a wide variety of jurors.
Right, some golf course. Yeah, they try to solve the case. That's not their job. Mm-hmm.
All right. So the next one I pulled up, guys, and we're going to obviously, like, after we're done going through all of them, we're obviously going to have to go back and kind of like really then dissect and kind of have the argument about what we think, like incorporate it. Like those freaking discussions are coming because, like I said, there's so much within here. I don't even know what to do. So I'm just going to kind of focus on let's read through them and digest everything later. It should be a mix. Yeah. So the next one, Shay, you suggested the excluding the Amazon click activity, and I'm very intrigued about this. So,
Well, I haven't read this one. I read
oh,
the order from the judge first. So I haven't read this one yet. It's up to you. I think that the judge offers a lot of information that led them to how they got to it, but this specifically, yeah, we can go over it.
okay. Yeah, Leon. So they are.
We're doing number 9.
Yeah. Order in limine excluding any Amazon evidence, purchase history, and Amazon click activity evidence by Mr. Kohberger. More specifically, the defense asserts that the limited disclosures made by state, lack of raw data, lack of complete data, lack of disclosure of expert opinion, lack of explanation of Amazon click activity, or any analysis related to amounts to cherry-picked limited data that does not show a full picture compared to warrants that requested extensive data. The state's refining of all the Amazon history and Amazon click activity is out of context, incomplete, and unfairly prejudicial, thus making it inadmissible. incomplete, irrelevant, and unfairly prejudicial evidence is barred by Rules XYZ and pursuant to the 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments. This motion should be read in conjunction with motion in limine 2, excluding expert Shane Cox and any other expert the state intends to use regarding all Amazon evidence. Okay, so I'll write down limine 2. So the introduction. God, Shay.
The state disclosed Shane Cox as an expert who will testify about Mr. Kohberger's Amazon account, activity on that account to include logins and Amazon click activity. Okay, so that very first sentence right there, we'll get a lot of information like from the judge's order, Melissa. Like maybe a different live, we could go through it because it's so technical, but they derived a lot of information from those logins. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this, all right, moving forward, sorry. The state wants to use very specific narrow dates. The state has not defined Amazon click activity in any reports or expert disclosures, nor provided any opinions or analysis related to the limited data it has produced. The data produced is extremely narrow when compared to the more inclusive and broad warrants and subpoenas. Even in the face of the court telling the state that its job was not done with its expert disclosures, nothing was produced in the state's rebuttal expert disclosure to further clarify the underlying data, analysis, and opinions it intends to offer regarding anything Amazon related. Mr. Kohberger faces his capital trial with no more than the state disclosing and an expert testifying about dates related to Mr. Kohberger's Amazon account and the production of records and expertise regarding Amazon click activity. Because Mr. Kohberger is placed in a position of guessing what the state's intentions are, he has consulted an expert, David Howell, to attempt preparation. Mr. Kohberger has learned the limited disclosure leaves him unprepared to confront this evidence. In this ever evolving age of technology, Amazon uses artificial intelligence, AI, to improve the customer experience by helping customers find products that match their interest and preferences. And then it provides the Amazon AI or story. Amazon's AI-driven system does not just reflect searches, it actively shapes user behavior through recommendations, paid advertisements, and algorithmic reinforcement. Amazon's use of AI began well before 2022. Often, when searching for something on Amazon, the end of the pathway does not tell the beginning of the pathway. This is because AI is continuously gathering information about the customer's interest and preferences and making suggestions along the way. Customer in the context of a household sharing an Amazon account is all members of the family sharing the account. In other words, the purchases, searches, and machine learning ML impact of the user of the household Amazon account. Amazon's recommendation system, powered by AI and ML, significantly influences what users see and click on. In 2022, Amazon's AI-driven system did not passively reflect user searches, but actively guide purchasing behavior based on predictive models. This means that a user's browsing and purchase history may not necessarily reflect deliberate intent, but could have been shaped by Amazon's algorithm. Omnichannel shopping extends beyond a single device. A user's Amazon activity spans across phones, tablets, laptops, desktops, and even smart home devices, all tracked and synchronized by Amazon. Shared household devices further complicate attribution as multiple users contribute to search history, ad targeting, and recommendation patterns. Devices, e.g., smartphones, computers, and tablets, talk to one another and learn from each other. For example, ads that pop up on Facebook and YouTube can be influenced by what you search for elsewhere.
Sorry, 1 second.
You're okay. I can keep reading.
No, I got it. So, all right. What? Wait, no, where'd you go?
I'm at the top of page 4.
Yeah, okay. So, Amazon's advertising system plays a critical role in shaping what users see and click on. And sorry, I just want to pause actually real quick because I saw someone leave a comment like, checking for click activity is reaching, highly disagree. Highly disagree. Unless we're talking about, hey, they found something through his click activity that doesn't seem related and they're trying to jump through hoops to make it related, I can understand that argument. But checking what someone's purchases were when there's a good chance that it could lead to the murder weapon or items used in the crime, I think that's absolutely crazy to say that that's a reach. It's not a reach at all. What would you expect to look at if you think someone may be the murderer, right? What they purchased, who they're talking to, the metadata on their phone, where they were, the GPS. Those are literally the go-to things.
Well, and this is assuming that like this is a shared family device and maybe if I don't know, a family Amazon membership. Like I don't know if that's where they took that information. I would want more information based on that because I have my own phone. I have Amazon Family. I don't get any ads that would relate to what my kids look at, you know, and they have their
Mm-hmm.
own Amazon account. So my mind is kind of going through my own experience, but also thinking that we do that based on those other orders, there were a lot of different email addresses and logins. So
Yep.
I don't really know where this is driving the point to. Like maybe sure
Right.
if there's an old computer and I could see that, but we're not really getting that info. Are you seeing it that way?
Not yet.
Okay. But
Waiting.
you know what I mean though?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine. So, Amazon's advertising system plays a critical role in shaping what users see and click on. Unlike a simple search and buy process, Amazon's AI driven ad placements, keyword targeting, and personalized recommendations actively guide users towards specific products. Amazon specializes in driving suggestions that are not actively searched for by a purchaser. In this case, the states refining or limiting the Amazon's click activity to a specific click or a specific item excludes data, takes things out of context, and could tell a completely inaccurate story to cause the jury to speculate about intent. Full Amazon advertising logs and recommendation data must be reviewed to determine whether a purchase was truly user initiated or heavily influenced by Amazon's AI. The data produced does not identify the purchaser through means other than by name of credit card, nor does it identify the device from which the item was purchased. For example, suppose someone buys a pair of binoculars on Amazon on a household account with 4 users. Of course. Who in the household either searched for binoculars or through some other searches triggered Amazon's AI to do a target ad for binoculars? How long were they searching for the binoculars? Were they wish listed for a period of time? Were they placed in the cart and removed? All which could indicate indecisiveness. Did an Amazon AI generated AD cause the purchase of binoculars as a result of a search for some other product? Were other ads shown to the purchaser by Amazon? How long were binoculars searched before being actually purchased? What types were considered or placed as target ads by Amazon? Were other purchases made around the time that provide context? Other purchases made around the same time can provide context to the intent of the purchaser. In our example, the shopper also purchased a sleeping bag, a tent, a cook stove, long johns, and a safety vest for an upcoming hunting trip. I see what they're, even within their example, hold on. Compare the possibility that the purchaser instead bought rope, night vision goggles, zip ties, duct tape, a tarp, and a stun gun. These combined purchases could show a completely different intent.
Mhm. Did you
Amazon's,
did,
I thought it was interesting that these aren't two very far off examples, but they're even the long johns, the safety vest, like they're using
did you
in
read the subscript below too?
oh no. So simply because a package is delivered to a name at a house using the credit card of someone in the house does not indicate that person is the purchaser when it comes to an Amazon account, which I know that's true. I'm not saying that's not true, but he
Right.
lived alone. He was alone.
And I think
Oh
it
my God.
so what I was thinking from this that like maybe they couldn't find a purchase like on like through like his Amazon account, but it was they had to go further in the click activity. Like they said, it's stuff that they clicked on, maybe they added, that they removed. I mean, I don't know. I'm so curious.
This is interesting. So, Amazon sponsored products and display ads allow sellers to pay for visibility, meaning that if someone searched for binoculars, camping gear, or outdoor equipment, they could have been ad targeted with a gun or bear spray listing, not because they were looking for these items, but because an advertiser paid for it to appear. Sellers using Amazon's as a platform to sell specifically choose terms to prompt ads, and those terms may be completely unrelated to the item they're selling. Yet that term will target an ad to get a purchaser's attention. Similarly, the frequently bought together and customers also bought sections, often assumed to reflect organic trends, are manipulated by paid placements. I'm sorry, I'm just giggling because I think that this is true. Everything in here is true. And I do think that this is interesting seeing this stuff incorporated in our generation now in true crime cases, because tech is such a big thing in our society. And yes, all of these things are true, but it's telling me that you are potentially nervous about something that is in his browsing history.
Oh, the way it's being described, like it's just being layered upon layered, you know?
Yeah, you're nervous, girl. So
Well, because
shared.
this is part of what she
Yeah.
tried to get with the Frakes filing,
Yep.
remember? So now
Yep.
she's coming at it, it got denied. Here we're going with motion to eliminate.
Leah, they didn't say that he was framed. where did the state I'm sorry, where did the defense say that they were being framed? You have to please provide a place where that implication is being made. Good night, Wolfie. So shared Amazon accounts also impact click activity or search history.
Do you want me to read?
No, I got it. I'm just trying to catch up with what was happening. Who said she was leaving, Andy? I don't see any comment. What are you worried about? If there's nothing in there that would be implicating him. Come on. That just tells me, sorry, but that just tells me your level of intelligence. Amazon click is framing? Ma'am, come on. So
Well, the judge will weigh the evidence. I mean, he's not going to want to let something in that. Yeah. I mean, we got to just trust the process, let them get through it.
Yeah, like, come on, guys. This is her job. This is her job. Shared Amazon accounts also impact click activity or search history. This is another example of incomplete or limited data leading to an improper conclusion in a shared household Amazon account. One person in a household's interest is certain items, and it impacts the entire household's account, attributed to click activity. This can even happen by the mere existence of proximity to a Wi-Fi network shared by others. See proximity advertising and perceived eavesdropping. The Times article. So this article explains the phenomenon where individuals believe their phones are eavesdropping on conversations, explaining that targeted ads often result from proximity advertising. Okay, hold on. So, and everybody knows, I believe that if it absolutely, first of all, it's part of your settings. You can enable them or you could disable them. They'll come enabled where they're able to access the microphone at certain points to give you personalized ads. Okay. So it's a feature on your phone, period. And you can disable that feature. But I think that she is now already setting it up for not just a family account, but the fact that Kohberger was in this apartment and next to all of these other Wi-Fis, that his could have got picked up from another person's in the building. She's going far, Shay.
Mhm.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you could go ahead. You could read.
Okay. Oh, I'm second. Sorry. On page 5. The Amazon click activity in this case is for an account which is a household account shared by Mr. Kohberger and other family members. The click history includes items searched for or viewed on Amazon, which might be related to a search conducted by other family members or might be suggested by Amazon based on prior interest or prior purchases, and AI and ML making recommendations that look like click activity. The discovery produced related to all Amazon data and the click activity in this case is extremely limited and therefore unconstitutionally incomplete, out of context, and inadmissible. Argument. Mr. Kohberger believes that the state intends to use Amazon evidence to prove elements of its case. To allow such in the face of explanation above and the failure to disclose would be unconstitutional and in violation of the rules of evidence. A. Rule 106 guards against introduction of incomplete evidence. In fairness, incomplete Amazon data and click activity should not be offered as evidence. Cherry picking specific clicks or purchases out of an Amazon click history removes all of the context explained above. Idaho Rule of Evidence 106 identifies the confines of the completeness doctrine. If a party introduces all or part of a writing or record statement, an adverse party may require the introduction at that time of any other part or any other writing or recorded statement that in fairness ought to be considered at the same time.
But just to say, that's like the argument that you're making is, hey, it doesn't matter if Kohberger's Amazon activity happened to show he was browsing K-bar styled knives. You're framing him. The fuck? Sorry.
Under the common law rule that underpins Idaho Rule of Evidence 106, the reason of the completion doctrine is that there is a danger that an out of context statement may create such prejudice that it is impossible to repair by a subsequent I can't even read right now, presentation of additional material. Thus, Rule 106 requires the omission of those portions of the statement that are necessary to qualify, explain, or place into the context the portion already introduced. Citations omitted. B. Rules 401, 402, and 403 exclude evidence that is irrelevant and unfairly prejudicial. Evidence must be relevant to be admissible. IRE 402. The test for relevancy is set out in IRE 401, which provides that evidence is relevant if A, it has any tendency to make a fact more or less probable than it would be without the evidence, and B, the fact is of consequence in determining the action. IRE 401, see also State versus Sheldon. IRE 402 instructs that relevant evidence is admissible unless these rules or other rules applicable in the courts of this state provide otherwise. Irrelevant evidence is not admissible. As noted above, IRE 401 provides the test for relevancy. Under IRE 403, this court may exclude evidence if its probative value is substantially outweighed by a danger of one or more of the following: unfair prejudice, confusing the issues, misleading the jury, undue delay, wasting time, or needlessly presenting cumulative evidence. IRE 403, this rule requires the court to balance the probative value of the evidence against the danger that the evidence may be unfairly prejudicial in State versus Johnson. See also IRE 403. These rules control what is relevant. So in conclusion, for the reasons addressed above, Mr. Kohberger respectfully requests this court grant his motion in limine to exclude any Amazon and Amazon click activity evidence because it is improperly isolated, out of context, does not take into account advertising influence and omni-channel factors. Mr. Kohberger intends to offer expert testimony of David Howell at the motion hearing on April 9th, 2025.
Okay. And just question, Leah. Do you have your mind made up before trial that Kohberger is innocent? Because if your answer is yes, that's the problem. The same way I can't have my mind made up he's guilty. I'm leaning towards at this time he's guilty, but I don't have my mind made up. When you speak like that and people like you speak like that, it's really concerning because nobody should be, oh, 100. You are being confirmation biased. Do you know what confirmation biased is? You are only willing to look at information that fits the narrative you want it to fit. That's a problem. And that is terrifying thinking about going back to 2112's question, just random jurors, and that is what we're dealing with. But it's not, you're picking you're complaining about cherry picking while also cherry picking. You take all of everything together and you're focused on this one limine. What about, where were you when we talked about all of the other stuff so far? Right, Leon, I'm leaning towards it. Absolutely. And if it comes out tomorrow, all of this other evidence comes out, I'm totally willing to go with where the evidence leads. But people, and I said this over 2 years ago, people have their mind made up that he was framed. He's not the guy. And it doesn't matter what the fuck comes out, they're not changing their mind. You should not be like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. Even seeing some of the Lemonade's title, wow.
Right. What do you want to do
Yeah.
next?
I was looking, and thank you, 2112. Wonder if Anne could have helped Scott Peterson with his search history. Nah, Amazon doesn't push water currents. My bad. Yo, listen, everything, and I acknowledge everything in there. Those are great points. Yeah, absolutely. These clicks are real. The suggestions, the hey, based on your prior purchases, people frequently bought these items together. Yeah, absolutely. All those exist. That's why I like that argument, but it all depends. Well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about something that we don't know to be related to the crime, but can look suspicious for someone to buy? Or do we know it to be something directly related to the crime? We don't have those answers yet.
I mean, and also, even though it's like a family household Amazon account, who's to say that that click activity, um, the data that they're producing and wanting to present is within the time frame that he wasn't living at home in Pennsylvania? We don't know. That was under a federal grand jury. I was looking at the order from the judge, and that part is very sparse. So the Amazon click activity was presented at the jury.
Get
Sorry, federal
out
grand
of
jury.
here. Seriously? Okay.
What?
Just some of these lemonades, Shay. All right. So now we have defense motion lemonade number 3. What is this, Melissa? This is regarding use of the term murder. Oh, I would be, as a victim's family members, I would be. Hold on, I'm just writing this down.
This one's short.
Yeah. So they are moving the court to prohibit the use of the words murder, murderer, murdered, murder weapon, and similar forms of the word murder applied to Bryan Kohberger during the trial of this matter. This motion is not seeking a prohibition on the use of the word murder on its varying forms in the charging document or jury instructions. This motion is made at blah, blah, blah. Whether the killings at issue are murder as allegedly committed by Bryan Kohberger or by an alternate suspect or someone still unknown is the ultimate issue. Each side will present this very argument to the jury. It is a matter of fact to be found by the jury after the court instructs the jury with the applicable instructions. To label Mr. Kohberger as a murderer, the alleged weapon consistent with an empty sheath as a murder weapon. The alleged weapon consistent. He has. Are you taking that for what I'm taking it at?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Like
So,
yeah, so they're saying the K bar, consistent with the empty sheath, is a murder weapon. Mm-hmm.
okay. To label Mr. Kohberger as a murderer, the alleged weapon consistent with an empty sheath as a murder weapon, or to assert that any of the four descendants was murdered by Mr. Kohberger denies his right to a fair trial and the right to presumed innocent. IRE 403 allows exclusion of evidence that is unfairly prejudicial to a party. By analogy, the same principle should apply to terminology that is unfairly prejudicial. The use of the word murder during the course of the trial is unfairly prejudicial in that it asserts a factual and legal conclusion of the evidence, a determination which is left to the jury. The prosecutor, law enforcement, and medical examiner are viewed with authority and respect by most jurors. When persons with authority speak, lay people tend to believe their statements and conclusions. If the prosecution and or its witnesses use these words in its case in chief, it would improperly imply to the jury that it is the prosecutor or witness's belief or opinion that the defendant is guilty of murder. This is improper opinion testimony under IRE 701 to 704. It is improper for the prosecution to express a personal belief unless the comment is based solely on inference, expert testimony that concerns conclusions or opinions that the average juror is qualified to draw from the facts, utilizing the juror's common sense and normal experience is inadmissible. Mr. Kohberger requests an order prohibiting the lawyers and witnesses from using the words murder, murder, murdered, murder weapon, as well as derivative forms of the word murder. Okay, I can see. That's what I was hung up on, Wolfie. That wait a second, and maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, but I took that as there's possibly another weapon that they are going to claim is the alleged murder weapon, but they don't know it to be true. The same that they're trying to prove Kohberger is the murderer, but they can't. I don't call him that because you can't prove it. The same way that you may have found this K-bar, but don't you call that the murder weapon just because it's consistent? That's how I took it, but I may have took it wrong. No, Andy, I was reading. How'd you take it, Shay?
Well, because I just took it as they don't want it to be called a murder weapon because one, I mean they, to our knowledge, like they don't have the weapon in custody, and if you'd have to use expert testimony to a probability that it came from a K bar, which would be consistent with using that sheath that was for a K bar. I mean, I guess I just took it as like because that sheath has his DNA on it, like they don't want anything that's connected to him or about what happened to use those terms. That's all I took it as. I don't know. Maybe I'm not following, sorry.
No, you're fine. I can see their point. I can understand. Hey, we need to be very careful with the words we're using because you don't want to put the murderer and Kohberger together and
Right.
associate that in the juror's mind. I can understand that. But to say that you can't. I think I'm more hung up on murdered. They were murdered. They it was homicide, 100%. How can you say to exclude that?
Well, they're murdered, and they said that they could use it in terms of like what the charges are, but you can't say they were murdered by him because then you
Right.
would be placing guilt.
But they're going too far with this. Not just murderer, murder, murdered, murder weapon, any derivative form of murderer. They were murdered.
Yeah, but then it says at the top, the motion is not seeking a prohibition of the use of the word murder or its variant forms in the charging document or jury instructions.
Right. Only in the charging document and jury instruction. That means all those witnesses, the whole trial, you can't use that word though.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spanning a little too far when it comes to the victims.
Right. And
But
that's
I
all
do
I'm
think,
saying. I understand their point and I get that, but not that far.
right, I agree with you there. But I also do think that they should be careful because you don't have the weapon that we know of,
Mhm.
and they just have the sheath. That I think that they should be careful in their verbiage of how they allege what type of weapon they believe it to be consistent with. I
Oh,
do think they should be
absolutely.
careful with that for sure.
Absolutely. I just think it would be highly offensive to not be able to refer to these four beautiful young adults as murdered because that's exactly what they were. So I understand the argument of, hey, I don't want to tie my defendant in using these words because it does seep into that of their subconscious. That's why we have the right to see them in regular clothing, right? Because seeing them even in the jail uniform, it puts this idea in a juror's mind. I get all of that, but I think there's middle ground that can be found there.
For sure, but then I look at it as you can just change out the words and use killed, killer.
Well, it
But
says
I think
any
murder
derivative
probably
form.
holds.
Derivative form, it would fall under that whole like you. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know how the judge would rule on that. Maybe he, says some of that is understandable. The other, I don't know. It is interesting.
Okay, so now we have number 4. You could read it is the motion in limine number 4 using the terms psychopath or sociopath.
All right. Comes now Bryan C. Kohberger by and through his attorneys of record and hereby moves the court for an order prohibiting the state from name calling. Specifically, this motion seeks to bar the use of the terms psychopath and sociopath. The motion is made pursuant to ICR 47, IRE 403, 701 through 704, the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution, and Article 1, Section 13 of the Idaho Constitution. IRE 403 allows exclusion of evidence that is unfairly prejudicial to a party. By analogy, the same principle should apply to terminology that is unfairly prejudicial. The use of the word psychopath or sociopath during the course of the trial is unfairly prejudicial. See attached affidavit of Dr. John Edens. This is improper opinion testimony under IRE 701 to 704. Neither term is a proper diagnosis and is unequivocally unfair prejudicial. Mr. Kohberger requests an order prohibiting the lawyers and witnesses from using the word psychopath and sociopath, which the exhibit, it was an affidavit of John Edens.
Hmm.
And that, okay, interesting.
Again, this is a lot of times we see expert testimony come up about what generalizing what a sociopath or what a psychopath may be and not necessarily attributing that to the defendant.
Mm-hmm.
Now again, she's doing I'm not
I'm not
upset at it.
against what
She's
she's
doing the
saying.
most. Yeah. She's doing the most, and that's her job.
Did you want to do number one, the inflammatory evidence?
Okay.
It's a pretty short one. It goes over some of like the data.
1 second.
And it's got a lot of like citations of cases, so this won't take us long. Yeah, I'm not against like rolling out some of those terms. I understand. I mean, he deserves a fair trial. Anybody does. So I like seeing how it plays out though. I'm curious. Like you said, like the one when we went over the murdered, that I thought was reaching a little bit like when in terms of talking about the victims.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the other stuff I understand, like you don't want it to be prejudicious to the
Right.
jury.
And thank you, 2112. She's reaching. She has no authority for these arguments. Anne already admitted once to Judge Hippler she had no authority for her arguments. And I don't blame her though for trying. Like I admire her for doing it. Just because my reaction though is what it is because if I don't feel like it's sufficient or it's ridiculous, in regards to this particular case. But I think she's doing exactly what she should be doing. All right, so this is motion in limine number 1, inflammatory evidence. So they are moving the court for an order preventing the prosecution from introducing irrelevant and unfairly prejudicial photographs, testimony, and other exhibits in violation of his right to a fair trial protected through the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments. Such rights are protected through application of Idaho criminal rules and Idaho rules of evidence. Mr. Kohberger respectfully requests this court order the state to not try the case through eliciting testimony and other evidence that is exceptionally inflammatory. Presenting the case in an inflammatory way is unfairly prejudicial. Any probative value is less than the danger. Additionally, the prosecution should not present the same information in a variety of ways, which is misleading or cumulative and a waste of time. So IRE 403 states, although relevant, evidence may be excluded if its probative value is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice, confusion of the issues, or misleading the jury, or by considerations of undue delay, waste of time, or needless presentation of cumulative evidence. The case contains over 68 terabytes of data. This data contains thousands of photographs. Many depict roughly the same content. There are photographs that depict the deceased as well as the same location without the deceased. Multiple officers took photographs of the same areas. Additionally, there are many hours of body-worn camera footage. Body-worn footage depicts the officers moving throughout the house. There are hundreds of photographs of autopsy proceedings. In addition to this evidence, over 100 officers and investigators have been involved in the case and hundreds of people that have been interviewed. Mr. Kohberger seeks to protect the integrity of his trial and requests an order preventing inflammatory evidence, including testimonial evidence, be excluded. Mr. Kohberger acknowledges the Idaho Supreme Court has held that a photograph cannot be excluded merely on the basis of being gruesome. However, Mr. Kohberger is not making that motion. Rather, he is requesting the state be prevented from introducing inflammatory evidence.
Hmm.
Go ahead.
No, I was just,
I know. But you could read the rest.
yeah, sorry, that was just my reaction. Just thinking, inflammatory is like evoking emotion, but if it
Yes.
is something to be gruesome, I think it evokes emotion
Yes.
naturally based on the audience.
And for lives, like, how can you not invoke emotion? But I understand what they're saying. And I think back to Leilani Simon,
Hmm.
and there were photographs that were excluded based on emotion. I think
Hmm.
back on what was her name? The trial that we just had. That Allie covered. What was the trial?
Oh, Megan Boswell.
Yes. And the medical examiner said she cannot show this photo because if she shows this photo, she does not think that the jury will be able to make an unbiased, like they will find her guilty based on emotion. I
Hmm.
get that.
Right.
Yes. But ooh, this is going to be hard because we have a quadruple homicide and it's rough. It's going to be a bad one. And so I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting. I understand Anne's point though of we don't need multiple, nor do I think the prosecution would. There's just no way, they're not going to sit there and go through not pertinent information. But I think it's going to start here and it's going to dwindle, dwindle, dwindle until she could chip away as much as she can.
Yeah, I agree. Uh, that'd be a tough seat for the judge, you know.
The blood was Kahilani. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But there was, we don't even know how much, but it was on the rail from the first floor to the second floor, which, as far as we know, the killer never even went. It's not strange if they swab an entire house that there's going to be little bits of blood around your house. That's not strange. It all depends on how much and where and things like that. Whose blood?
I mean, one, I can say, could you imagine that what if Maddie had no defensive wounds, didn't fight back, so she never touched the perpetrator?
Mm-hmm.
And then two, it matters in relevance to the crime scene. And we don't know how large or small that spot of blood was, how old or new it was. And when you look at the relevance of evidence, like it wasn't in the crime scene, it wasn't in Xana's room, it wasn't in uh, Maddie's room. And they had a party the night before. You don't think they would have other DNA and biological materials there? I definitely think that
Well,
they should look
yeah.
into it, but if they can't come to a conclusion of whose it is, then have some more stats behind it and be able to help one understand why it's not being reviewed as part of or in relevance to the crime itself, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so multiple studies have found that mock jurors are more likely to convict when exposed to graphic photos. Um, Other studies have shown that judicial instructions to ignore such evidence are ineffective, while some have actually found such instructions cause jurors to place more emphasis on that evidence. Mr. Kohberger's right to a fair trial, free from irrelevant, cumulative, and unfairly prejudicial evidence as guaranteed by the Constitution of the State of Idaho and the United States of America, would be violated to allow exhibits depicting gruesome details of the emotional reactions of the police officers at the scene or during their testimony during the trial. That's it. I
Hmm.
skipped over all that because it was
Yeah.
citing.
No, yeah.
So that last sentence is interesting.
To allow
Emotional.
exhibits depicting gruesome details or the emotional reactions of the police. Oh, I could imagine, bless those officers, I could imagine walking in and what their body camera footage caught.
Right? So
So sad.
it is sad. Remember how we went over? Okay. I was looking at the next motions because I looked at number two because I was wondering why some of them kept referring to number two, but now it kind of makes sense as I was
Yeah.
scrolling through it.
Yeah.
It looks like it's like an overarching document going through the expert witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
So So,
It kind of, when it goes into like all the little bits and pieces of what the Lemonades in the future show.
hmm yeah, that's what it looks like. Do you want to skip that one?
Yeah, I'm going to skip that one for now.
Okay.
I kind of want to go
Where do you want to go?
to
We did 5, 6, 7. Did we do 8?
no, we haven't done 8.
Is that one any good? Oh, that has to do with traffic stops.
I wanted to do number 13, conditions as an aggravator.
Okay. Let's do it.
Oh no, did I pull out? This is the wrong one, sorry.
Do you mind if I run the restroom real quick? And I
No,
can
go
help pick
ahead.
up reading in just a second.
So this is motion in limine number 13, conditions as an aggravator. Conditions. Aggravator. And they are moving the court, preventing the state. Oh, okay. So preventing the state from using Mr. Kohberger's mental health diagnosis of autism and the characteristics of his autism as evidence in its case. This motion is meant to protect Mr. Kohberger's 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments. Okay. So Mr. Kohberger has a diagnosis of autism when? I need to know. Okay. And he displays characteristics consistent with autism. A comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation of Bryan conducted by Dr. Rachel Orr found that Mr. Kohberger continues to exhibit all the core diagnostic features of ASD currently, with significant impact on his daily life. Mr. Kohberger shares characteristics such as social challenges, preservation, and lack of reciprocity. These characteristics are noted, but by those unfamiliar with autism, as not picking up on social cues. In evaluating Mr. Kohberger, Dr. Orr found that he had displayed lifelong deficits in social, emotional reciprocity, including limited perspective talking and limited sharing of affect and emotions of others. Because of his autism, others may see Bryan as not recognizing social cues, continuing to talk to others when the conversation would naturally end, over focusing on a topic or hobby of interest, or talking about the same topic repeatedly, using a complicated vocabulary, or seemingly self-absorbed. Bryan's autism is also accompanied by obsessive compulsiveness and an eating disorder. Since childhood, Mr. Kohberger has exhibited compulsions around getting things in his eyes, hand washing, and other germ avoidant behaviors. These characteristics must not be used by the prosecution as factors for the jury to consider as aggravators. Evidence of mental illness in capital case litigation is mitigation evidence. The United States Supreme Court and Idaho Supreme Court recognize evidence of a defendant's mental illness as mitigating. So you guys have to remember they do not have NGRI in Idaho. Defendants who commit criminal acts that are attributable to disadvantaged background or to emotional and mental problems may be less culpable than defendants who have no such excuse. So Kohberger's autism is mitigation evidence. It is inappropriate for the prosecution to wrap mitigating evidence into an aggravator. In Roper v. Simmons, the Supreme Court noted with disapproval that the prosecutor had argued that mitigating evidence of the defendant's youth should actually be considered as an aggravator. The court suggested that a rule prohibiting such conduct would have been warranted if not for the court's larger concerns requiring that death be excluded altogether. Allowing the state to argue that Kohberger's mental illness is an aggravating factor that violates the 8th and 14th Amendments by precluding the jury from giving meaningful consideration and effect to that mitigating evidence. Mr. Kohberger points the court to Abdul Kabir v. Quarterman for an overview of the court's jurisprudence on this issues, including Lockett, Edlings, and Penry. Individualized sentencing in capital cases reflects the concern of the court for fairness in proceedings. As such, Idaho is required to provide from unhindered consideration of mitigating evidence. And yeah, okay. So you want to go?
So the court has defined mitigating factors to be any evidence that might serve as a basis for a sentence less than death. Skipper versus South Carolina. Mitigating circumstances are not necessarily factors that lead sentencers to believe that a defendant is a good person, despite having committed a horrible crime. As the Supreme Court has explained, compassionate or mitigating factors may stem from the diverse frailties of humankind. In a constitutionally fair proceeding, juries must be able to consider mitigation as mitigation. So,
Yeah, no, hold on, because all right, allowing the state.
Okay. Allowing the state to argue that Mr. Kohberger's mental health issues are actually aggravators unlawfully interferes with the jury's ability to give effect to that mitigation evidence. It is more prejudicial than if the sentencer were told to ignore it or give it no weight, which is prohibited by law. The state also cannot argue that factors which are casually related to Mr. Kohberger's mental health issues should serve to aggravate the punishment, i.e., that they contribute to future dangerous propensity to kill or contribute to aggravators regarding heinousness of the crime. This is functionally the same thing as arguing that he should be sentenced to death because of his mental illness, which is constitutionally impermissible.
They keep going about case law, schizophrenia. Okay, allowing the state again.
Allowing the state to argue that Mr. Kohberger's mental health and developmental disabilities are aggravators violates the 8th and 14th Amendments by criminalizing his status as a disabled person. Criminalization of a person's, quote, mere status, unquote, violates the 8th Amendment as applied to the states through the 14th Amendment. Justice Douglas wrote in his concurrence in Robinson, we would forget the teachings of the Eighth Amendment if we allowed sickness to be made a crime and permitted sick people to be punished for being sick. The age of enlightenment cannot tolerate such barbarous action. The same reasoning applies here. Mr. Kohberger cannot be sentenced to death due to his mere status as a person with ASD, a disability which in fact renders him less culpable and which should be considered by the jury only as mitigation. Mr. Kohberger respectfully requests the court prevent the state from using his diagnosis of autism or any characteristic thereof as an aggravator if a sentencing proceeding is held. Wow. It makes sense though. It makes sense to me. But I guess I just kind of wonder like how would one also show patterns of behavior when it comes to this the mitigating factors of ASD, you know? That would be a really interesting kind of line to see how that would play out. You know what I mean?
I think they're going to use what he was doing when they swatted as part of the autism and not wanting to focus on certain behaviors and maybe character witnesses. The gloves, the germs, you see how she's introducing that, like germophobia, his eyes, which I need to figure that out. I haven't been able to have anything pop in my head. Okay, eyes. Do I remember anything about his eyes that she would specifically mention that? And I can't agree right now. Like, I can't think of it right now. But I think she's trying to, hey, what he was doing, separating trash, wearing gloves, things like that, odd hours of the night. Nope, you cannot focus on any of that because that all falls under his diagnosis, which when was this diagnosis. And I'm not saying a diagnosis cannot be accurate post arrest. I'm just saying makes a big effing difference to me, because you could pay for any diagnosis. You don't even have to pay. You can find someone to diagnose with anything, and that doesn't mean that he's not. I'm just saying if this was prior to the arrest, I would put a lot more faith in it than I would after.
Yeah. No, I have all the same thoughts and questions you do. I mean, I'm curious. Like, I don't. Hmm,
I'm telling you, I have information overload, Shay.
I know.
Yeah.
I am too.
Cheers, Callie. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
My mind's racing right now.
Mm-hmm. So this is motion in limine number 14, statistical analysis. This is again about the item Q13.1, which are the fingernail scrapings. Allowing such testimony would violate Mr. Kohberger's federal and state constitutional rights to due process, a fair trial, effective assistance of counsel, and confrontation of witnesses. So, the requested limits are made to secure fairness in administration to the end of the truth may be ascertained and proceedings justly determined. Further, the above requested matters are ripe for consideration by the court pursuant to IRE 104 based on the existence of issues that involve preliminary questions of admissibility. So the statements of fact say in a grand jury testimony, Jade Miller testified as to the results of testing done on item Q1.1, the sheath strap and inner snap. The statistic reported by the lab is a likelihood ratio. Miller testified that the likelihood ratio compares the probability of the evidence, meaning the DNA profile obtained, and comparing two different hypotheses. Grand jury transcript at 368, redaction. Miller reported the statistic for this comparison, but the state posed the following question to Miller, redacted. Miller responded, redacted. From Miller's answer to this question, it is clear that the comparison to the world population is not an appropriate or scientific way to discuss LR. So the argument is the use of misleading language confuses and misleads the finder of fact and is barred by the rules 402, 403, as well as due process, in that the evidence is overly prejudicial. The erroneous admission of irrelevant and prejudicial evidence will offend due process when it renders a trial fundamentally unfair. Here, expanding beyond the language of the report would prejudice Mr. Kohberger, and that it might allow the jury to infer that the inconclusive data would mean that he might be included. That is what it means. That is what it means. He can't be excluded. It doesn't mean he's included. It just means he can't be excluded. LRs are different from traditional statistic that courts and juries are used to seeing and hearing. The LR is a comparison of hypotheses. It is not a statement of identify or probability of identity. It simply asks the question, given the data, which hypotheses tested is more likely? The court should exclude questions and testimony such as that described above. Clearly, Miller disagreed with the premise of that question. Her answer that the LR was not that type of statistic indicates that the question itself was based on a misunderstanding of the meaning of the LR. As Miller describes in her testimony, the LR is a comparison of two hypotheses, not a statement of rarity of the profile or probability of finding the same profile in the population. This type of question could potentially confuse and mislead the jury and require an undue consumption of time in cross-examination. Conclusion: a fair trial is mandated by Mr. Kohberger's federal and state constitutional rights, a due process, a fair trial, effective assistance of counsel, and confrontation of witnesses. Expert testimony improperly elicited must be excluded. So that kind of pairs off with eliminate number 5 with the inconclusive data. Hi, Ash. I don't think that's going to work.
I do think it's interesting that Barlow submitted that one.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, yeah, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's going to work though. You can't say, I'm sorry, I was reading. You can't say that we can't literally cite that he can't be excluded. Because defense, you could get up there and you could start name dropping. Can who this person be excluded? No. Can this person be, like, all the 4 names that were redacted? You could make your same point. But to say that, hey, they can't even mention it? Oh, no, 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 Jim John Doe. No. Okay, this is, and we're almost through like the defense limines. So
Yeah, I think we skipped over a couple, but they're kind of repetitive from some of the Frank's motion stuff.
yeah. Motion limine number 12, not number 2. I'm sorry. Number 12, make and model of suspect vehicle. If you want to start that off.
Comes now, Bryan C. Kohberger, by and through his attorneys, a record, and hereby moves this honorable court to exclude at trial testimony by any state witness as to the make and model of the vehicle seen on the 1112 King Road surveillance footage. This motion is made pursuant to IRE, and then list of rules, and further based upon Mr. Kohberger's rights under the United States Constitution, 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments, and Article 1, Section 13 of the Idaho Constitution. Pursuant to IRE 103 and 104, this court is required, to the extent possible, to limit a jury's exposure to inadmissible evidence. The state has claimed in various filings and reports that an FBI forensic examiner, Anthony ML, identified the make and model of this vehicle seen driving in the area of 1122 King Road in the early morning hours of November 13, 2022. The state has referred to this as suspect vehicle 1. The vehicle was not identified from surveillance footage in the area of 1112 King Road.
We have a photo. Look, guys, it's the fucking pumpkins. Oh, wow. There it is. There it is.
Uh,
Wow,
and
man. It's so crazy to see it all coming together. It really is.
I know. The surveillance footage comes from a residence 1112. It depicts the corner of King and Queen roads and to the house with the camera. From that footage, lights from the vehicle can be seen on Walenta Road, a north/south roadway next to the neighborhood. These photos are from 1112 King Road camera. Special Agent ML did not make a vehicle identification, was not made from this footage. Rather, as noted in emails between Mr. Amell and FBI Special Agent Edward Jacobson, it is clear that the identification of the make and model of the vehicle in this video was made via a separate video taken at 1125 Bridge Road.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no continuous footage linking the vehicle at the 1112 King Road footage and that from the Ridge Road. Additional surveillance footage depicts vehicles but not identifiable vehicles, thus labeling the cars from various bits of footage as the same vehicle is speculative. Mr. Kohberger seeks an order prohibiting the state linking the vehicle identification of the make and model of the vehicle in the 1112 King Road video based on the identification of the car at 1125 Ridge Road and referring to the vehicles as suspect vehicle 1. The speculative nature of testifying that the vehicle is the same vehicle renders it irrelevant to these proceedings, far more unfairly prejudicial than probative. This is also a jury question, and testimony calling the two vehicles the same invades the province of the jury. Thus, this court should exclude testimony linking the two vehicles as the same. And I watched Gray's like reenactment of it, and he was tying it to like the time, like whenever we had the Linda Lane
Yep.
in like timing it out. He did a pretty good job, which he usually does, when it comes to
Yeah.
these.
And I wanted to go over that.
Oh yeah, and he's got his 360 tour. We gotta check that
Yeah.
out. It's a new one.
Okay, let me see. Exclude IgG, improper expert testimony, middleman. No, did I read that? No. Number 10.
Which one?
This is motion in limine number 10. So this is, which one am I on right now? Okay.
David Middleman.
Off. Yes. Not that one. It would be this one. Okay. So this is motion in limine number 10. You holding it down, Harlot?
Yeah.
Poor Harlot.
You want me to read?
That's okay. I got it. So it's improper expert opinion middleman. Okay. So this, they're moving for an order excluding improperly expert testimony from David Middleman. Allowing improper expert testimony violates Kohberger's federal and state constitutional rights. Okay. On February 17, 2025, the prosecution submitted the disclosure for rebuttal witness David Middleman of Othram Labs. In the disclosure, Middleman offers multiple opinions as to quality of the work done by Othram Labs in generating an SNP profile and for starting the IgG search for relatives of the SNP profile. In addition to these opinions, Middleman offers multiple objectionable opinions that fall outside of the proper role of an expert and are highly speculative. A. Middleman should be excluded as a witness based on failure to disclose in a timely fashion and due process. As set forth in limine motion to exclude IgG number 11, Mr. Middleman and his proposed testimony were disclosed for the first time on February 17, 2025. Kohberger incorporates by reference the facts and arguments presented in that motion. Due to the later discovery in the motion to exclude IgG altogether, Middleman is no longer a rebuttal witness, and his untimely disclosure puts Kohberger at a significant evidentiary disadvantage, and his testimony, along with the rest of the IgG evidence, must be excluded. B. Middleman offers opinions that must exclude because they are highly speculative. The state offers the following opinions. Middleman will testify that the collection of DNA evidence from the crime scene, the development of an STR profile, and its entry into CODIS all took place before Othram's involvement in the case. With an STR profile already in CODIS, identifying the suspect was ultimately a matter of time. Othram was engaged to build an SNP profile and perform forensic genetic genealogy to accelerate the investigative process. While this approach expedited the identification, it did not change the inevitable outcome. The suspect would have been identified regardless. The FBI's role may have further accelerated the work Othram had already begun, but Othram was on track to reach that same conclusion. This is evident from the preliminary incomplete report Othram provided after being asked to stop its efforts. In this case, additional reference testing was always going to lead to the identification of Mr. Kohberger, regardless of which agency completed the process of when it occurred. All of the above opinions are improper because they are highly speculative. An expert opinion that merely suggests possibilities, not probabilities, would only invite conjecture and may be properly excluded. Middleman's disclosure states no facts to support this opinion. These opinions appear to be Middleman's belief in DNA testing rather than a reasoned expert opinion based on facts. Admission of these opinions would invite conjecture and should be excluded. The first opinion seems to assume that at some point in time, Mr. Kohberger's DNA would be entered into CODIS. The only way into CODIS is via the commission or conviction for a felony. This assumption is improper and would mislead the jury and would create cross-examination on this issue that would take an undue consumption of time. Not only are the opinions above highly speculative as to what would have occurred rather than what did occur, they are irrelevant. The opinions do nothing to prove guilt or innocence and seemed geared to simply promote the technology of DNA testing. Oh, while this goal is not improper, the means is. As the disclosure set forth, Middleman will testify about his lab, their processes, and their quality systems. The speculative opinions add nothing more than just confusion and will result in an undue consumption of time. This testimony is prohibited pursuant to Idaho rules of evidence and Kohberger's federal and state constitutional rights of a fair trial, confrontation, and due process. Conclusion: a fair trial is mandated by Kohberger's federal and state constitutional rights, and improper speculative expert testimony must be excluded.
I bet it gets that. Like, if we're not going to get into the IgG stuff, you know? That was the guy, wasn't that the guy that was like pretty wordy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was wordy.
Yeah. Because I think, yeah. And they go for IgG again.
Oh, yeah. So let me see what we got left on the fence. Number 2, which is the vague and undisclosed expert testimony, but I feel like okay, we could jump through this. Let's see what's in it. Nope, not this one. Not this one.
You want to do the vague one?
So this one, I'm kind of just looking in the order now, like chronological order of which ones we didn't do. Number 2, which is motion eliminate vague and undisclosed expert testimony. Vague
Right.
and undisclosed, which I know that a lot is repetitive, but let's just kind of jump and see what's in here. So you want to start with 1, Mr. Kohberger?
Yeah. 1, Mr. Kohberger requests exclusion and or limitation of the following expert testimony. S1. Jenny Ayers, forensic scientist. Testimony must be limited to only her work depicted in Idaho State Police Forensic Laboratory Report 25 and her checklist of testing in Mr. Kohberger's apartment and office. She has not authored any laboratory reports expressing opinion. Any other testimony is outside of Idaho criminal rules. Then number 2, S2 FBI Special Agent Nicholas Balance. Testimony must be prohibited as no report containing findings or opinions has been produced. The only disclosures are 2 PowerPoint presentations. One is noted as a draft. The PowerPoint depicts information derived from cell tower data, call detail records, drive test data, and interpretation of the same. It is abundantly clear that in creating this PowerPoint, Special Agent Balance used an unknown methodology to analyze and visualize certain data contained within the defendant's call detail records while omitting and or ignoring other relevant data. It is impossible to determine why certain data was included in the PowerPoint while other data was omitted or ignored. As Special Agent Balance has produced no report documenting his actual analysis. The omitted or ignored data referenced above is exculpatory evidence in Mr. Kohberger's defense. The call detail records in full provide partial alibi corroboration. As such, the complete lack of disclosure as to any opinion and or report addressing this issue from Agent Balance makes it impossible to anticipate what he may testify to as an expert on this matter. In its expert rebuttal disclosures, the state provided a summary of Special Agent Balance's proposed testimony. Portions of the summary are in direct conflict with his previous PowerPoint disclosure, further complicating Mr. Kohberger's guesses at what his testimony may be. Mr. Kohberger's expert, Cy Ray, has conducted a detailed analysis of Special Agent Balance's PowerPoint and found severely flawed findings that are well outside of established and known best practices in the field. The PowerPoint is vague and it makes it impossible to determine what special agent balance is claiming. Thus, the additional summary does not remedy the lack of disclosure, leaving Mr. Kohberger and an inability to prepare and meet the constitutional protection of confrontation. Testimony must be prohibited pursuant to Idaho criminal law. Number 3.
Yeah, as the next four, including.
So, but if
Is
he
this
provided additional information on what he would be going over within the states, like, wouldn't Cyray like pivot and then review that material?
you would
Like,
think?
yeah, it's interesting.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of just jumping through because just like the other one, it's going through. But who? Mr. and Mrs. Barnhart habit evidence the state has not produced, specifying no expert opinion has been disclosed. That it's undisclosed. Okay. Amazon. The full amount of raw data received from Amazon has never been disclosed. Only narrow dates with some purchases have been disclosed despite warrants seeking very broad materials over the span of a year and according to warrant returns. So Excel spreadsheets apparently relied on by the state have redacted purchases without explanation. Context for purchases at least 6 months prior to what has been provided are critical for drawing opinions. There is no full disclosure or analysis of clickstream history that spans the scope of the multiple warrants and subpoenas. So there is no full Amazon advertising history, AI-driven recommendations, or cookies. The identification of the device used is not disclosed or analyzed. No cart or wish list data is disclosed or analyzed. No omni-channel tracking data or platforms are disclosed or analyzed for a household. Okay, we went through that. That has not been produced, analyzed, or explained as an expert opinion. Kohberger cannot prepare to confront purported evidence against him that is undisclosed and lacks context. So they're saying the state has cherry-picked information. So he cannot determine if the state is asserting a direct search or review of items algorithmically suggested through Amazon's AD system. So testimony should be prohibited. We got Michael Douglas. Okay, again about the Amazon. The same thing. Idaho State Laboratory expert witnesses, to extent their own opinions, are limited to the reports authored by them and based on their own expert evaluation and not the subject of this motion in limine.
That's pretty normal.
Yeah, don't know providing testimony outside of the actual reports. Riley Nolan, we already went through that in motion limine number 6. Eric Seat, expert opinion of this DNA technician provides an explanation of possible testimony regarding a methodology for DNA testing, the YSTR. The defense has received no discovery or indication that the method has been used in this case. There is no opinion disclosed other than because of the large volume of discovery, the state directs the defense to summary reports of the expert's ultimate conclusions, which can be found in lab report number 3. DNA of an alternate suspect, but no ultimate opinion or result is specified. Testimony through this witness, other than relating to an alternate perpetrator, must be prohibited. So unless this witness is going to point to an alternate perpetrator, he can't speak.
Oh, wow.
Okay, the state has provided no disclosure of any expert opinions related to 67 electronic devices and third-party data collected during the investigation. State failed to identify what portions of the electronic device data, digital data, or third-party data will be presented. State failed to disclose any expert opinion about what analysis of the devices and data depict. The state has disclosed in discovery a new report stating further examination is taking place. Disclosure came well after state's discovery deadline. The report does not contain any sort of opinion. Recently, the state submitted rebuttal expert disclosures. It cannot provide rebuttal as Kohberger has not provided information about what his experts may say. State's disclosure would seem to be the proverbial chicken and egg anecdote, except in criminal proceedings that is accused. Okay. So the state's disclosures remain vague, so Kohberger cannot prepare to confront purported evidence that is undisclosed. Electronic evidence in this case is critical, and state is impeding the defense from being able to prepare to confront the evidence or use the evidence in Kohberger's capital trial.
I guess that's kind of where I'm at a little bit of an impasse here is if both parties have the same data, then this kind of sounds like you're wanting the state to show their hand so you know how to respond, Like, shouldn't you be prepared to respond to all the data,
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, okay.
Sorry, this guy is Detective Gilbertson. It says he's irrelevant, outside of the scope of rebuttal. And it says the detective walked along alone through a house that he is intimately familiar with in the middle of broad daylight more than 1 week after the house had been vacated and changed significantly due to a homicide investigation. He simply counted out loud upon entering rooms. This is a far, far cry from what the state allegedly occurs. Additionally, Kohberger attempted to learn more about the experiment through discovery. He sought things such as recordings or photographs of the timed run or written notes taken during the experiment. Nothing was provided in discovery. Prosecution states items don't exist. The court should exclude his testimony, and the house has been torn down, so the defense cannot now effectively rebut this inflammatory and minimally relevant testimony. I wonder what experiment was done. So Gary is a toxicology expert. Kohberger did not disclose an expert relating to toxicology. So there is no rebuttal expert and should be excluded from trial. Then rebuttal expert relating to IgG matters. This is a separate motion. We went over that. So then it just goes through the arguments again of why, in the interest of fairness, justice, and judicial economy, to exclude the above listed, which it just cites a lot of case law, why late disclosures are so prejudicial to the opposing party. Okay, that's case law. Same analysis is applicable here. Kohberger is a capital defendant who is entitled to his day in court. He is entitled to a heightened standard of reliability because prosecutors are seeking his execution. Prejudice is magnified in a criminal case when the state has the advantage of the defendant's expert disclosures in drafting their initial expert opinions. State has the resources of dozens, if not hundreds of people working on its behalf. It has the advantage of technologies that is available only to law enforcement agencies, not to the defense. It is bringing the full resources of state of Idaho to bear alongside assistance from the federal government, while Kohberger has a defense team consisting of 3 attorneys, 1 investigator, 1 mitigation specialist, who must not review all of the state's evidence, but conduct an independent investigation into both the circumstances of the crime and into Kohberger's entire life history. Pre-existing resource disparity must be taken into account when assessing the additional tactical advantage that the state has properly obtained. Notably, the state did not seek modification of the scheduling order to allow for a later disclosure deadline, which would equally apply to the defense and would not have given the prosecution a tactical advantage. Fundamentally unfair for the state to shirk the court's order and re-app the tactical advantage of being able to review the defense's expert opinions before making their initial disclosures, in addition to the already existing advantage in resources. So they should exclude the listed expert reports and evidence listed above and preclude the death penalty at trial in order to cure some measure of the prejudice to Mr. Kohberger. Do you know how much money is put to Kohberger's defense?
Millions.
Millions. Millions.
Millions.
Defense.
Motion and eliminate number 8 we haven't gone over. think we went through the rest of those
Okay.
1 through 7. This one has to do with the traffic stop. And I only know that because I had read a state's motion with it. All
Unnoticed 404B evidence.
right. Comes now Bryan C. Kohberger, by and through his attorneys, a record and pursuant to the Idaho Rules of Evidence, moves this honorable court for an order eliminate excluding any 404B evidence. As of the date of this filing, the state has only noticed a prior traffic stop as 404B evidence. Mr. Kohberger moves that any other 404B evidence be precluded from the presentation at trial because deadlines for filing motions eliminate are not staggered. Mr. Kohberger is forced to guess what the state may seek to introduce. Rather than guess, he seeks to exclude all unnoticed 404B evidence. Upon the state's timely filing of 404B evidence, Mr. Kohberger will object as appropriate. Additional support for this motion includes blah, blah, and then it just goes on to cite in the argument.
Listen to Harlot. Sorry. Sorry, God. Oh no, did your audio go out, Shay? Your devices aren't connected on the other Shay. Should I boot the other Shay? I'll boot the other Shay. Maybe that'll help. Okay, now connect your devices. She's back here, but her mic and cam aren't connected. Shay. There she is. Okay, you're back.
It kicked me out.
It did. Same thing happened last time too, and it'll show your devices aren't connected.
It's so weird. So I don't know if you already said this, but this is so they state already like submitted that they were going to introduce that traffic stop in August.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think they're saying they'll just argue that one, nothing else. So that one's pretty easy.
Okay. So I think
The only other one I saw was like number 11.
which is this, yeah, the excluding the IgG evidence. That's the only one I had left too. We could jump through this. But a lot of it, these ones are like that other one. It was kind of repetitive from what I could see. It's kind of repetitive. Relevant facts. And sorry, hold on. Let me actually.
Yeah, I was skimming it too.
Number 11. Ah.
I feel like because we just read through everything, we kind of already done this.
Yeah, I know. Well, is there anything else you think that's worth reading tonight?
Like out of this document?
Out of the, like, on the docket, like, do you think we should read the motion to strike the penalty for the autism spectrum disorder?
Sure. Yeah. So I definitely want to do the states next time because the states has some good stuff
Yeah.
too.
Oh yeah. Then that, so you guys, like, we went through the defenses. There's so much. Like, there's fucking so much. But next live we'll do the other side of it, the state's responses, which are very interesting and they contain a lot of information. So this is the motion to strike death penalty for the autism spectrum disorder. Motion to strike. Damn, there's so much. I love
know.
Judge Hippler.
There's a lot. Does chat, do y'all want to
Ooh,
go through
this is
this
a
part
big
too?
one. We could go through it like I, I feel like we figured out by now like which parts are just formality versus which parts have the meat and potatoes, you know what I mean? Um Hopefully
So,
it'll disclose where when he was diagnosed.
yeah, and chat said, didn't the judge rule that the IG stuff comes in? Not necessarily. There was a Frank's motions filed by the defense where basically they were trying to undo the warrants, and that has been denied. Now we're at the state, or now we're at the point where both defense and prosecution are filing motions in limine, and this is what the judge will be reviewing to what evidence may be admissible in court versus not. So this is a pretty big process right here. Like we'll see both sides filing for it, and then the judge will make orders accordingly towards what those rules of evidence laws pertain to.
Yep. So this is motion to get the death penalty off the table because of his autism disorder, okay? So it says that Kohberger's autism reduces his culpability. And you have to remember, guys, they don't have not guilty by reason of insanity. They don't have that.
Not
But
Idaho.
his autism reduces his culpability, negates the ret- retributive, and deterrent purposes of capital punishment and exposes him to the unacceptable risk that he will be wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death. So Kohberger relies on his right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment, his right to due process, his right to a fair trial, counsel, present a defense, reliable sentencing determination, and other rights. Kohberger is aware of the deadline previously imposed by the court's scheduling order and has good faith for filing this motion. Good cause is laid out in the affidavit attached. So we have a table of contents because this is quite big, but let's just jump through. This is case law. Death is different. When state announces its intention to seek the death penalty in a case, it imposes an extraordinary burden upon the court, state, defense counsel to ensure the fairness, accuracy, and reliability of the trial and any subsequent sentencing proceeding. When a defendant's life is at stake, a court must be particularly sensitive to ensure that every safeguard is observed. Imposing a heightened standard of reliability in cases where the state is seeking death. United States Supreme Court has firmly held that capital punishment is only constitutional under the Eighth Amendment. Okay, give me what we need to know. Okay, so the court has categorically prohibited the imposition of the death penalty where a particular characteristic of the defendant renders him less culpable, negates the retributive and deterrent aims of capital punishment, or creates a risk of an erroneous death sentence. So the reasoning applies with equal force to defendants who, like Kohberger, have autism spectrum disorder, ASD, which is a neurological and developmental disorder that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and behave. So Kohberger's exhibit deficits in nearly all the same areas cited by the court in concluding that it is unconstitutional for people with intellectual disabilities to be sentenced to death because such sentences are not proportional and cannot be reliably imposed. The persuasive media coverage emphasizing symptoms of Kohberger's disability demonstrates the very risks recognized by the court and are already realized to his prejudice. So the argument, one, due to impairments in communication, reasoning, social skills, and impulse control, people with ASD are insufficiently culpable to be executed.
Can we read?
I'm kind of just skimming through to see which parts need to be read.
Um, okay. So the death penalty is only appropriate sought in a case when it falls into a very narrow category of the most serious crimes and involves a defendant whose extremely culpability makes them the most deserving of an execution. So there's already a Supreme Court ruling, Atkins. So if you guys are, watching and hearing Atkins, that's the case they're referring to. It says because of their impairments, however, by definition, they have diminished capacities to understand and process information, to communicate, to abstract from mistakes, and learn from experience, to engage in logical reasoning, to control impulses, and to understand the reactions of others. So, people with ASD exhibit impairments in nearly all of these areas. There are two primary diagnostic criteria for ASD. First, a person must display persistent deficits in social communication and interactions across multiple contexts, as manifest by deficits in all three of the following areas. One, social emotional reciprocity. Two, nonverbal communicative behaviors used for social interaction. And three, developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. Second, a person must display restrictive, repetitive patterns of behaviors, interest, or activities as manifested by at least two of the following. One, stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects or speech. Two, insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines or ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. Three, highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. And four, hyper or hyperactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. As a result, all these deficits, offenders with autism spectrum disorder tend to lack theory of mind, especially empathy and the ability to see from other perspectives, the ability to appreciate the whole context, executive functioning required for planning and organization, appreciation for the consequences of one's actions, and the ability to generalize learning from one situation to another. Okay. So understanding the reactions from others. Let's see. You see anything else in there?
Yeah, they're just saying people with ASD often have difficulty identifying the emotional or mental stages. So I understand what they're doing. They're setting up the stage and giving the outline of ASD. They struggle to recognize and regulate their own emotions. This can manifest as diminished capacity to control impulses. Um, Many people with ASD, this manifests in compulsive behavior that cannot easily be controlled by rational thinking. Kohberger has exhibited compulsions around hand washing and other cleaning behaviors. See, she's so, diminished ability to communicate is another hallmark of ASD. Language deficits are common with ASD, ranging from complete lack of verbal language skills to difficulty recognizing and understanding abstract language, sarcasm, and irony. So, Kohberger has strong verbal abilities, but he has failed to recognize multiple idioms during Dr. Orr's evaluation. I would like to know when that was. His language was often over inclusive, disorganized, highly repetitive, and overly formal. So, like people with intellectual disabilities, people with autism have diminished capacities to understand and process information and to abstract from mistakes and learn from experience. So then it cites developmental disorders with an article. So Dr. Orr observed Kohberger tended to perceive information in a more piecemeal manner. So people with ASD show diminished adaptive functioning, much like people with intellectual disabilities. So it comes back around to people with ASD who are similarly impaired in this area should not be sentenced to death. The deterrent and retributive aims of the death penalty are not met by executing people with ASD. It cites the amendments. It's like grossly out of proportion to the crime, or it does not fulfill the two distinct social purposes. I really want to know when he had this.
Like when he was diagnosed?
Yes. Because I know they're going through like a outline of characteristics of ASD. I get it. I feel like a lot
Right.
of us are knowledgeable with that. Making the argument that executing people with ASD does not meaningfully satisfy the penological aims of retribution or deterrence. Okay. Awareness of ASD becomes more widespread. Evolving standards of decency condemn execution of people with ASD. So, Eighth Amendment prohibits excessive punishments.
It goes into this disorder.
Yeah, it's really going through the whole outline of ASD, referencing the DSM, major shift in understanding autism. Okay, all of that's true. Increased awareness of ASD, with greater efforts by the criminal legal system to account for the role that intellectual disabilities, developmental disorders, and mental health conditions play in offending behavior. Cited again with this. Okay, 2 states have enacted legislation barring people with serious mental illness from being sentenced to death. So ASD specifically has been deemed relevant to defendants' interactions with law enforcement and ability to formulate criminal intent.
Okay. Let's just go ahead.
Another case. Okay.
Yeah,
Tell me about Kohberger.
I know I'm scrolling too as you are on my split screen.
So, showing a significant limitation in adaptive functioning in at least 2 of the following skill areas: communication, self care, home living, social or interpersonal skills, use of community resources, self direction, functional academic skills, work, leisure, health, or safety. So, death sentences for people with ASD are inherently unreliable because defendants with ASD cannot present mitigation evidence. Mitigation evidence that will be meaningfully considered by the jury. That's what your job is. Sorry, but that's what your job is. And another case being cited. Give us Kohberger, not all these other. So they are less able to give meaningful assistance to their counsel. Their demeanor may create an unwarranted impression of lack of remorse for their crimes. They are typically poor witnesses and can be a two-edged sword that may enhance the likelihood that the aggravating factor of future dangerousness will be found by the jury. Defendants with ASD are less able to meaningfully assist their counsel. Okay.
Defendants with ASD are less able to meaningfully.
Facial expression, posture, tone. Clients with ASD will not be able to recognize or interpret, and they have repetitive behavior and interests, and it can manifest as hyper focus on a particular topic at the exclusion of all others, which again, we're all very familiar with this. People with ASD tend to be rigid in their thinking and struggle with decision making.
There is a portion, another, like at the bottom, that these impairments for him.
These impairments cannot simply be overcome by a client who wants to be cooperative. Kohberger displays extremely rigid thinking. Why can't I, like, my brain is reading too much now. Perseverates?
Yeah.
Perseverates?
Perseverates, yeah.
On specific topics, processes information on a piecemeal basis, struggles to plan ahead, and demonstrates little insight into his own behaviors and emotion. Were you about to say something?
I was sorry.
No, you're fine.
I'm sorry, I was out loud enunciating that word because I was
That's a hard word. Or my brain couldn't process it. Persevates?
Yeah, what the fuck? Yeah, keep going.
I don't know. So, even assuming Kohberger aims to be as helpful as possible in preparing the case, his mental deficiencies will invade every detail of that aid, from client relationship to fact investigation to mitigation investigation to pretrial motions to trial strategy. No matter how helpful Kohberger may wish to be, it is simply not possible for him to aid counsel in a way that someone without the deficits accompanying ASD would be able to. This lack of the ability is the precise concern articulated in Atkins, and Atkins, again, is the case that was referenced above. The demeanor of a defendant with ASD will likely create an unwarranted impression of lack of remorse. Okay, so the defendant's like Kohberger's behavior, manner, facial expressions, and emotional responses or their absence combine to make an overall impression on the tier of fact, an impression that can be powerful influence on the outcome of the trial. Concerns about jurors' impressions of like Kohberger's remorse or lack thereof apply with equal force to persons afflicted with ASD as they do to those with intellectual disabilities. Demeanor is particularly important in capital trials where the defendant's life is at stake. Serious prejudice could result if the defendant's capacity to react and respond to the proceedings and to demonstrate remorse or compassion is inhibited. References other case. So, due to physical manifestations of their disability, people with ASD are particularly vulnerable to bias on account of their courtroom demeanor. Diagnostic criteria for ASD list repetitive motor movements, echolalia, and excessive smelling or touching of objects as symptoms of ASD. People with ASD often engage in repetitive, self stimulating behavior, which can include hand flapping, finger snapping, and body rocking. A juror seeing the defendant engage in any of those behaviors while sitting at a counsel table during a murder trial would perceive the defendant as strange, out of control, and even disrespectful as such a solemn proceeding. Subtler indicators of ASD can be just as damning for capital defendants, if not more so. Inability to make and maintain eye contact. It can be interpreted as guilt or shame. Difficulty recognizing emotions of others. They make facial expressions that are awkward and incongruent with the tone of the proceedings. Most concerningly, they can often display a flat affect, even in the face of highly emotional evidence, which can be interpreted as coldness or lack of remorse. Kohberger's ASD manifests in many of these highly prejudicial but completely involuntary mannerisms. Dr. Orr observed that he subtly rocks his upper torso, especially while engaged in a cognitive task or listening to someone else, both of which are almost certain to occur during his trial. His range of facial expression is limited. His baseline affect is stoic, and his expression are sometimes incongruent with what is happening around him. Kohberger also exhibits atypical eye contact, including an intense gaze. As discussed below, Kohberger's facial expressions, including his lack of affect and concentrated stare, are already being assigned sinister, meaning by observers.
Mhm.
So, jurors assessing a case from the moment they step into the courtroom, jurors will be forced to determine whether Kohberger will live or die. Kohberger himself is essentially a piece of evidence to be examined and evaluated. Every movement and expression is subject to analysis. Due to his ASD, Kohberger simply cannot comport himself in a manner that aligns with societal expectations of normalcy. This creates an unconscionable risk that he will be executed because of his disability rather than his culpability. And people with ASD make poor witnesses. If you want to jump through this one.
Concerns about the demeanor of a defendant with ASD apply with greater force when he chooses to take the stand at his own defense. Both verbal, nonverbal communication with the jury is impeded by the deficits experienced by someone with ASD. Um, Scroll down. Okay. So, due to the deficits associated with ASD, a defendant like Mr. Kohberger is just as likely as someone with intellectual disability to make a poor witness. Mr. Kohberger's speech is awkward, both in its content and delivery. As Dr. Orr observed, his tone and cadence are abnormal, his interactions lack fluidity, and his language is often over-inclusive, disorganized, highly repetitive, and oddly formal. He is highly distracted by sounds or activity occurring around him, and he frequently looks from side to side to monitor his periphery. As a result of his high distractibility, he often needs questions or instructions repeated. He frequently shifts the topic back to himself, even when it's inappropriate. He uses abrupt, matter of fact phrases that would be considered rude. He carries on about topics in a circular manner and perseveres about specific non-essential details. These symptoms of Mr. Kohberger's ASD will alienate him from the jury and significantly hamper his ability to make a persuasive showing of an innocence or of mitigation. I really want to know when. This is
Yeah. But here, and I might be offensive when I say this,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna say it because
I
it's me.
think I think you're thinking what I'm thinking.
Everything they're describing with ASD, absolutely spot on. ASD affects so many people. This is not abnormal at all, actually. Maybe if we were in a different time, I can understand the jury not understanding that. In today's society, more people, more friends that I have either a child or a loved one affected with ASD than not. Let that sink in, okay? Um and it would be mentioned. Him being on the spectrum, being diagnosed would be something that the jury is aware of. So it's not like they wouldn't be aware of that and then just, hey, let's just judge him, right? They'd be aware of it. So you can't really find me any person that can't land a diagnosis with a lot of these symptoms. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess for me, I was thinking I was kind of going down the route, like, say that the diagnosis came while incarcerated. But my question would be is, say, Dr. Orr, what material other than coming
What he's
from
presenting
him,
at the time.
yeah, coming
Yeah,
from him himself as historical could be true? Like, what if there is a play on this to try to get out of the death penalty? I mean,
absolutely.
that's kind of my thoughts. I don't want to like that's just I'm open to anything, but I just want to hear like when did this diagnosis come about? And then, if they're going to share this much, I understand
That's
we were entitled to this.
huge.
Right. And then what avenues did Dr. Orr go down for that historical information? And so Dr. Orr was did the state hire Dr. Orr, or I mean, do we
Great
have
question.
like,
Is this
or
an
did the
independent,
defense?
right?
Yeah,
Was this an independent analysis of him, and I
lots of
need to
questions.
know. And guess what? Honestly, again, I don't like I do not like the stigma, especially around autism, around a lot of mental health diagnoses. But it is very common. And I'm not
Mhm.
trying to say that to diminish or minimize. I'm not. Versus everything the way I was able to breeze right past that because I'm like a lot of us are aware of these symptoms and characteristics
Mhm.
because yes, they can harlot. And this is the thing. This is what I'm trying to say. Like, even with Letitia Stout, okay, you have Dr. Dorothy Lewis with, believe it or not, she was very experienced and she's an expert in her field. She's able to roll up there and say Letitia has dissociative identity disorder, the same way that they have an expert come up that doesn't. So I'm a strong believer anybody, any layman can walk into a doctor's office and you'll get a diagnosis if you want a freaking diagnosis. Like, period. Like, I think we overly diagnose nowadays. Um, but Kohberger being evaluated once he's incarcerated, I'm gonna piggyback off what Shay was saying. What material are you using? Just what he's exhibiting now that he knows he's being evaluated? That doesn't mean he's not on the spectrum. Just I would put a lot more credibility in it if it was a prior diagnosis.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that's most important is my understanding in this Atkins Supreme Court case, a large part of the factoring that came into it is the IQ level. And everything we've been reading over, I understand has to do with like, social emotional like awareness to some physical like habits or tics or behaviors like per se, but that is kind of the thing that is just left in my mind is the IQ level here. I thought that that is what would be evaluated. Maybe that's like in the sentencing phase, but then we had this motion in limine for the mitigation. So I am so curious how the judge will approach this. I've never seen anything like it. I'm very interested.
Well, and again, we could sit here all day and say, hey, the jury's gonna judge based off of my um the way I am, the way I look, the way I am in the courtroom.
Mhm.
But you have to go in, and that's what the jurors are swearing to, that they are going to go by the facts and the evidence and only what's admitted, not by those things. There's nothing you could do. Like, essentially, he is being tried for a quadruple homicide. That's what it comes down to, because what the way they're making it out to be is not, hey, let's just strike the death penalty. Like, let's just get him fucking off. Like, I feel like an argument is being made that he's just not capable, and that's bullshit.
Right. Well, you have it. It's like there's one or two things they'll say, but he was too smart. Why would he leave that? And then there's
Right.
the other factor that, it's like, well, the flip side of this. So it's you can't have it both ways, I guess.
And
Um,
again, usually being on the spectrum, far smarter. He know right from wrong? Period. He knows right from wrong. Okay. What's his IQ? Great question, because you could also know right from wrong and not have a high IQ. I'm aware of that. But as far as emotional responses and the stimming, so many people are affected with those types of mental illnesses or disabilities. Come on. Like, come on.
mhm.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't like, again, it adds to the stigma and but it's kind of like a slap in the face, because it's basically saying jurors aren't educated enough and will put him in this category based on it, versus no, you're actually adding to that stigma. And for, I don't like it. I just don't like it.
Yeah. It's a sensitive topic for sure.
Um
This part gets into some jurors' thoughts on the mitigation of it.
yeah, the defendant will likely be seen as dangerous and as a result sentenced to death. The risk that the jury would perceive him as a mentally ill monster. See, I don't like that. I don't like that. I
I
just
think
don't
that's
like that.
inflammatory, in
Yeah,
my opinion. Like,
yeah,
that's not fair.
no. And being on the spectrum, ASD is not like what she is. She's drawing parallels to two completely different things.
Mm.
Oh my God. So the risk that the jury's fear about the defendant's future dangerousness will overshadow the mitigating force of defense evidence is especially pronounced in cases of ASD. ASD is beyond the comprehension. Wow. Is beyond the comprehension of most jurors and is chronic, permanent, and untreatable. That's
What?
insulting.
Wow.
Research has found that neurotypical adults demonstrate negative implicit bias against adults with ASD.
When was
Moreover,
this study done?
yeah, that's what
2020?
I'd like to know. Because again, just like you guys started, there is so much since in just a few short years, even with the DM, like so much knowledge we have gotten in a short period of time. But then you're also using it you can't have it both ways. Sorry, I'm getting pissed off about this because I don't like that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, Relevant to Kohberger's case and the media frenzy surrounding it, heightened media attention on ASD associated crimes has raised public alarm over the possible link between an autism diagnosis and violent behavior. Uh,
Mm.
But I don't like evidence of the serious mental illness. Serious mental illness and ASD are not synonymous.
Well, I think that's kind of where I was a little bit confused in because I thought like Atkins too was like considering, say, I'm just gonna draw from mental illness, like say it's like schizophrenia or something of the sort, like those things that would be in consideration. Hmm, I need to do more research on this. Like even though I think I've
Yeah.
done some, it's not enough.
These defendants are more likely to be sentenced to death. Yeah, okay, I can understand if you're coming in with a diagnosis like schizophrenia, something that really would scare where you're watching the out like, but not autism. Like I just don't see it like that. Um
Do you feel like
so
it's a stretch a little bit?
I do
Like,
think it's a stretch. I think that there are great points, and as far as we're going to see different communication skills, different verbiage, maybe self-soothing techniques, lack of emotional responses, all of those absolutely I could apply that if he had an autism diagnosis. To use that and make the jump that's being made here though, absolutely not, because the jury would be made aware very quickly, probably in opening statements, that he is diagnosed with ASD, and have an expert up there explaining, if they didn't already know, what the symptoms, everything that they just detailed in here, and then they apply that, if they didn't know. But honestly, everybody there, I don't like the correlation to severe mental deficits or illnesses to this. It's
mhm,
not. It's not. And it doesn't make him any less accountable.
right.
Right. He was
Well,
high functioning if he's on the spectrum.
and just because you're on the spectrum doesn't make you likely to commit a crime.
No, it actually makes you more likely to be the victim.
Mm. All right. The court addressed the reality that evidence of mental illness is often a double-edged sword in November 2024 memorandum of decision and order on death penalty motions. Here and after order on death penalty motions. The court denied Mr. Kohberger's motion to strike the propensity aggravator on the grounds that double-edged evidence is dealt with through instructions on the mitigation side, not through striking an aggravator. Order on death penalty motions at 19. However, the United States Supreme Court overruled Penry and Atkins and explicitly held that the double-edged nature of intellectual disability evidence is one reason why defendants with intellectual disabilities cannot be sentenced to death in accordance with the 8th and 14th Amendment's reliability requirement. The Supreme Court reiterated this principle when it categorically barred execution of juvenile offenders, noting that the prosecution had argued that the defendant's youth was aggravating rather than mitigating. So the court rejected anything less than categorical. All right. It says Supreme Court had clearly established where mitigating disability evidence may be mutated into an aggravator. The remedy is not a mere jury instruction, but exclusion of death as sentencing outcome. Okay.
And exactly neat. Exactly.
Right.
And now they're coming in with, okay, well, even if they don't find that a categorical exclusion is warranted, the lack of reliability inherent to any death sentence opposed on Kohberger provides independent grounds to strike death in this case. There is no need to speculate about what impact Kohberger's ASD might have on his ability to present a meaningful defense. That's what you're for. Oh, the prejudice is already clear. How is it already? No. In its decision transferring venue of Kohberger's case, the Leda County Court acknowledged the extraordinary media attention received by this case. Much of that attention focused on Kohberger himself, in particular on his disability.
Wait,
On
wait,
his
wait, wait, wait.
disability that we didn't know about.
Nobody. What?
They focused, yes, absolutely. People focused on his demeanor and the fact that he didn't really say anything. He was very stoic and calm. Okay, they're basing it off of just the little bits they've seen. They didn't even know he had a diagnosis. So how are you going to say, oh my God. Okay, she's doing her job. She's doing her job.
Making creepy comments.
Well, look, even the New York Times true crime video bloggers have assigned nefarious meanings to the symptoms of Mr. Kohberger's ASD. So they focus on Kohberger's social deficits, particularly as they relate to his interactions with women. They accuse Kohberger of making creepy comments to female staff at a brewery. Okay, I gotcha. Look, the suspect in Idaho killings had me Remember that, guys? But again, those are just stories being run. Is there any validity into it? They're
But what
rumors.
if it's the words themselves that creeped him out? What if it
Right.
wasn't the demeanor? Like,
Then an article alleging that Kohberger made female students at WSU feel uncomfortable. Through an investigation by the university, cleared Mr. Kohberger of any wrongdoing and described how he lost his job as a teaching assistant due to his failure to meet the norms of professional behavior in his interactions with the faculty. They can easily be explained by Kohberger's ASD. Given their difficulty interpreting social cues, people with ASD may misconstrue social niceties as romantic interests. What? It's no surprise that Kohberger came across socially awkward or that he struggled to adapt to professional norms. These impairments are hallmarks of his disability. Huh. Lack
it
of
just
facial
seems like we
expression.
just put an umbrella over
Yeah,
every like
everything.
interaction like somebody has with somebody. I don't think
Yep.
that's fair.
No, I don't think that's fair at all. Um, Lack of facial expressions and abnormalities, eye contact, body language are so emblematic of ASD that they are explicitly listed in the diagnostic criteria for the disorder. But to the online commentators who have developed a cottage industry devoted to parsing Kohberger's every movement, these symptoms of his disability are sure signs of his guilt. No. No. Oh God. One video analyzing Kohberger's body type, which has received over 1 million views, infers guilt from his deadpan look and robot-like walk, positing that his facial expressions and body language prove he is a murderous incel. Okay. And there's also the ones that are saying he's completely innocent and is framed. What's your point? When the fuck does any of this, when does this, it's not relevant.
So they had a headline from the U.S. Sun that says Idaho suspect Bryan Kohberger's
It's
psychopathic
YouTube.
stare.
It's YouTube. God. Yep.
Wow.
Another video, over 300,000 views. Lambast Kohberger for his glare and blank, empty stare, his cold iciness, and his intense expression and his lack of facial affect. Law and Crime Network. Oh my God. Look at these YouTube videos. The rigidity of his posture and his apparent lack of emotion. New York Post described Kohberger as showing a level of calm most comparable to infamous assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. Oh, man. Headline from the U.S. Sun says, it all look of a killer. Idaho suspect Bryan Kohberger, psychopathic stare entering court, hides chilling emotions, says body language expert. Widely viewed and highly prejudicial media reports draped in the language of expertise and analysis demonize Kohberger for his disability. In an environment so tainted by rampant and vitriolic conjecture, it is impossible for Kohberger to receive the individualized sentencing determination, including full and careful consideration of mitigation evidence that the Constitution demands, whether the state seeks to extinguish a human life. So, again, none of that fucking matters when you walk into a courtroom and you have 12 jurors who don't know what they don't need to know, and you explain your client has ASD and this can explain these the lack of emotional responses or whatever you're trying to that's when they'll know. None of these fucking videos make a damn
I
like
mean,
I
I mean, I think that if you trade this out for, say, a convicted perpetrator, they've had headlines that have been as such as well, you know?
yeah,
Hmm.
but you can do this with every person charged. There's headlines everywhere.
Now, if he has, if you know, if he really has been diagnosed for some time, or they have a way to go back, like I get it. Like I don't discount it, but I'm also, like you said, the flip side of it. But what about the others that have a difference of opinion, you know? They're not looking at these things and getting evoking this emotion. They're seeing something different.
Yep. And hey, with the autism, I can see like okay, that I'm skeptical about when the diagnosis was, but if that's a genuine diagnosis, okay, now that stoic look that we all have come to know with Bryan, maybe I can account for okay, that may make a little bit more sense. Maybe that's why we're not seeing that emotional response that we may normally see, right, with like Luigi and stuff. Um but I just don't understand the jump that we're doing here. It's a large fucking jump. And so many people are directly or indirectly affected um, with having a loved one or a friend or someone who is on the spectrum. And I just don't like putting them in like the little box. I don't like doing that. And then saying that the jury is not going to be educated enough to understand. What? He has such a like he's a very intelligent man. Put the emotional and social cues, to the side. He's still he was very high functioning. He was very
Hmm.
successful. He was doing what he had to do. You can't act like he's not capable of even aiding in his own damn defense. That's what your job is. That's what your job is. But he can't even aid in his own defense. He can't even talk to you guys and help. Come on.
I guess, with his interest in criminology and stuff, like I would
Yes.
assume that he would want to take part in it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then you got exactly. Then you got Luigi over here who raises his eyebrows and they say that he's making aggressive facial movements. We can sit here all damn day and do this. So, Kohberger, on account of his disability, will be unreliably convicted and sentenced to death. For all the reasons said above, Kohberger's ASD prevents him from being sentenced to death in a manner that accords with constitutional requirements of proportionality and reliability. Like juveniles and people with disabilities, he is insufficiently culpable to be sentenced to death. The aims of deterrence and retribution will not be satisfied by his execution, and he faces an unacceptable risk that the death penalty will be imposed in spite of factors which may call for a less severe penalty. As such, the death penalty must be struck as a possible penalty in this case. Listen, I think she's doing what she needs to do. I think I'm just getting emotional about it because like I know people on the spectrum too, and I don't like when they get like I don't know, like I feel like we've come a very long way in a short period of time, and there's so much awareness around it, and I don't like the notion being put forward that people are going to see a difference in just his demeanor and then say burn him at the stake. I don't like that, and to put it on the same level as like schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder. And again, no hate at all to any of that, but like there's such a big leap
Right.
happening here, and it's not the same. It's not the same.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to say, I mean, also, like, just because somebody does actually have like a mental health illness or disorder doesn't mean that they are going to commit a crime. There's people that
No.
live with schizophrenia. My stepsister was schizophrenic
Absolutely.
before she passed,
Yep.
you know, and she wasn't a criminal by
No.
any means.
And like, I won't disregard the fact that I understand with something like a more of a severe mental illness, that unknown is scary. The unknown is scary to people, and I get that. And there wasn't as much awareness and an understanding and education around all of this. Um, and so I don't know, as far as if you are dealing with, let's say, a schizophrenic, just for example, and you're seeing those characteristics and symptoms of maybe like a schizophrenic episode in the courtroom, would they be more likely to sentence to death? I don't know. I don't have enough information to tell you, and statistics of how, like with the cases of how often did that happen. I don't know, but I won't disregard that that's a possibility. I just don't see ASD. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Yeah, it's such a huge spectrum. It's such a huge spectrum. And a lot of the characteristics overlap with other diagnoses. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, it's really not that far out of reality for people to be like, oh, okay, like that makes a little bit more sense if we're not going to see that type of reaction. They're going to be looking at the fucking evidence. Him sitting there in a stoic manner with his head down, let's just say, okay, we've seen it before. And I don't think anyone's going to convict, like, I don't think anyone's going to just sentence to death based on that. But we have to remember, she tried to get this death penalty off before this. So she's
Mhm.
just kind of going down the list.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was looking at the case file, it was defendants. Hold on, I had it up. It was defendants
Yes, Alana.
motion for leave to file additional motions challenging the death penalty. And that was says come it, this was a court sealed an order that there was a notice of trial setting filed October 9th, 2024. The defense counsel asked for leave to file 2 additional motions challenging the death penalty. So this would be one of them.
Hmm.
I'm wondering what the other would be. I was trying to find in the files.
I thought I saw.
Did they have? I know the state has had a couple of responses, but I was trying to find if what other one they would be going against.
Improper death penalty. No, improper death penalty comments. Motion to strike death penalty, RE, autism spectrum disorder. Maybe would it be under one of the.
I don't know. Maybe they haven't filed it yet.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, man. All right. So then the next live we'll do the state's response. And I really like, because I like hearing what the defense is putting out, and then the state comes out and they're like, no, let me release this little nugget for you. And we're like, oh, and then the defense goes back and they release their little nugget, and you're like, oh. But at this point, and again, I don't have my mind made up, even though I speak passionately, so it may seem like he's guilty. But from what I'm seeing so far, I kind of stick by what I said 2 years ago. I'm more likely to believe he's guilty, and corners may have been cut, which isn't good, but he's still guilty. It's still him. And that's what I think Anne is focusing on. Let me hope to get him out of this on a technicality, not so much that it is him. And I really saw that when I saw her arguing the IGG and the family tree, right? And let me focus so much, not that it isn't my client's DNA, right? I can't say that it's my client, it's not his DNA. And I also can't even argue that his rights are being violated because it wasn't even his DNA in the database. Uh, but it showed me, oof, yeah, you can't argue that it's his. You can't argue it was at the crime scene. So she's trying to go all the way around, up, down, over, out, through this way, through that way, to try to get it hooked on a technicality, which again, it's going to be an issue if there was a corner cut, but I think I'm sitting on right now leaning towards guilty.
I'm open to all evidence to come in. I'm really curious how it's going to pan out. And I thank you for letting me come up and go through it with you.
No, absolutely, and I'm so excited to go through the rest.
So,
That's a lot though, and my brain kind of has to process that all.
likewise. And
But
I got
one
some
thing,
other stuff I was working on too that I want to show you. Was
absolutely, please do. Hey, let me ask you though, real quick.
Mhm.
Especially being a criminology student, I'm sure he's taken psych classes. He would, and I'm not saying he's faking symptoms or characteristics, but wouldn't he more so have a good understanding of it if he wanted to?
I never put it past anybody, but I also like to give people the benefit of the doubt too, you know? So I'm kind of stuck on that fence. I don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a hard place to be in because, you don't ever want somebody that is in need of consideration of such case law that's been in effect to protect people, that do have, a, a mental disability. Like I agree with like sparing their life. I understand that, but that's just something beyond my full understanding of how that would be reviewed. Like I would expect that they would have like clinical experts like go into like a hearing and that would have to move forward to be reviewed. That would be my assumption. Like that would be its own like, side piece to be able to litigate and figure out where to move forward with that piece.
Yeah. And me too, Neat. I wouldn't be surprised if he is legit ASD and just got the diagnosis. I'm just suspicious of a diagnosis if it came, after he was charged. Um, but I don't think the argument is met, in my opinion, to take death penalty off the table just for an ASD diagnosis. Parallels were drawn between a severe mental health deficit and the ASD, and I don't look at those as synonymous whatsoever.
Yeah.
But I don't know. All right, I guess we'll see what the state responds with, because again, we got a lot to go through, and I look forward to going through every line, and then
So-
and then watching Gray. I want to. I didn't watch him yet, but he uploaded videos of like how, what is it?
Well, one he's done, he did a 360 video with his 3D tour that he'd been working on. He'd been kind of like doing videos leading up to it. So you know how you like to go into that one website and you could like look around and like move it, like, move through the rooms. Like the
Oh,
video itself is
nice.
360. And so he has a new one that's corrected. It wasn't in the text I sent you because he uploaded a new one
Okay.
after that. And
He's
then
good at those things. He's really talented with that.
he is very talented with that. And then this last one that I watched because I was just being super nosy was the one that went with the defense's motion with the make and model of the car.
Yeah.
He pulled up the 1112
Mm.
video or that vehicle, and then he kind of mapped back to like the timing of like when the passes would be with Linda Lane and kind of talk through that. So that one's just kind of interesting just to see. But hey, he's not right all the time. We're
No,
not right. No, everybody can be wrong or right. I just like to hear people's theories and how they're kind of coming about it, whether I agree or not.
I want to absorb all this information, and then I'd love to just have overall discussions of now with this new information, what does everyone think? You know,
Hmm.
but I feel overloaded even just from what we got now. Like my brain is overstimulated right now.
I know. And then you're gonna like go to sleep, so you're trying not to like probably watch all this stuff that's out there.
No, I don't want to because I don't want to get biased. Like whether you realize it or not, people's opinions they do. Even if you try, hey, I'm not going to I'm just going to listen to it, but I'm not going to let it absorb, into my brain. It does absorb into your brain. It does taint your brain. And so I'm trying not to, but there's a lot. Yeah, there's so much, Arlet. Wow. All right. Well, I'm going to have to take this all on because I was still blown away with the damn fucking vacuum, dude. I couldn't let that go. And my brain has been trying to wrap. But now a firefighter? A firefight? Okay. Like, I'm going to have to sit on this and ponder this for a bit.
All right. Well, good night, girl. I
Yes,
appreciate
I
you.
love you. Thank you. Thank
Love
you,
you.
Harlot, holding it down in there. And all the mods are absolutely amazing. But thank you all for being here. We will be doing part 2 very soon. Well, part 7, but like part 2 of this. And I just look forward to continue getting answers, picking this apart and going down this rabbit hole. And trial's going to be here before you know it. And by the time trial comes, everyone here is going to be fully up to date and caught up. And so you won't need to do any catching up. Why is my bubble so big? I'm sorry. Now my ADHD is it's starting to get bad, but why is my bubble so big? Did anyone Shay left and my bubble grew. My bubble is not usually the size of the fucking screen. Is it like that for everyone? Well, I swear, usually my bubble's not that big. But all right, guys, thank you all so much for being here. I don't know why my bubble's big, but have a wonderful night, and I'll see you guys. Doesn't it, Harlot? Like, I swear it's never this big. It's fine. All right, have a wonderful night, and I'll talk to you all soon.